about disinformation, Obama said that social media firms' design choices contribute to polarization and called for more transparency and Section 230 reforms. Former President Obama criticized social media companies for contributing to polarization through design choices on their platforms, which led Mark Andreessen to say, will former President Obama call for more censorship at Stanford tomorrow? I'll be surprised and impressed if he doesn't. And Mark Andreessen did one hell of a tweet recently, which I have to share with you all. I think he did this like Tuesday or Monday. And I shared it at my live tech event in Stockholm, which was fantastic, by the way, with Sequoia. And let me pull this up real quick, because this is I found something quite interesting that I want to share with the class, which I shared with the live audience, but I didn't get a chance to share with you all. And give me 2 seconds. Here it comes. I'm pulling up the slides from the event. Here we go. There it is. So on April 17th, Mark, which I think was Monday, Mark Andreessen tweeted the following, saying, I predict essentially identical censorship and deplatforming policies across all layers of the internet stack. Now, Mark Andreessen is a very notable person to say those words, because Mark Andreessen, did I not say, maybe I said this already. I don't know. I don't think I did. But Mark Andreessen is two things. He's kind of the top tech investor in the world in terms of influence, thought leadership, and whatnot at Andreessen Horowitz. And he's in the business of making predictions. That's what big global tech investors do. They're making predictions about tech. But very, very rarely, if ever, will you ever see a VC actually say the words, I predict. Because they don't want to be wrong. Because there's a huge financial cost for being wrong when you stick your neck out and say the words, I predict. Right? So, when Mark Andreessen starts a tweet with the two words, I predict, you better believe he knows this is happening. You see what I'm saying? So, I mean, when was the last time any top VC made a tweet starting with the two words, I predict? They don't do it unless they know for sure. So, that's worth noting. Now, his prediction is about the internet stack, meaning the layers of the internet. Well, it turns out Mr. Mark Andreessen created the web browser. This thing that you use to surf the interwebs. Yeah, he created that. So he knows a thing or two about the internet stack as one of the fundamental architects and pioneers of it. So he knows a little bit about what he's talking about here. More than most people, more than anybody. So when he says, I predict something about the internet stack, listen the fuck up. And listen to what he's predicting, because it's quite profound. Here's what he says. Let's listen through very closely, because this is potentially one of the most important tweets that has been twatted in the past week, and no, there was not one tech journal story about it. Let's read it together nice and slowly to fully digest and absorb it. He says, I predict essentially identical censorship and deplatforming policies across all layers of the legacy internet stack. Client-side and server-side internet service providers, cloud platforms, CDNs, payment networks, client OSs, browsers, email clients, etc. With only rare exceptions, the pressure is intense. What is he talking about? What he's talking about is the deplatforming that's happening on Twitter and on YouTube and on other platforms. We saw some of it happen on the payment gateways, like PayPal, like OnlyFans, like what was that crazy dude from Austin? the far right guy from Texas who his name escapes me, but I can see his face clear as day.
Ted
Anyway,
Cruz?
no, the radio guy.
No, you're talking about Roston Perot from many years ago, or am I going too far back?
No. More recently, he's the guy who talks like this and he never shuts up and he keeps talking. What's
You don't mean the governor, Abbott, right?
no who? God damn, he's a radio host kind of guy.
You
What's
don't
it?
mean
You
questionable
sounded
opinions.
like Jesse Ventura.
I know, but he got totally deplatformed from everywhere. God, what's his name?
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Oh, the guy from Infowars.
Infowars. Yes, thank you,
Alex Jones.
Alex Jones. Thank you very much. So Alex Jones got deplatformed 5 ways to Fridays. Many people are getting deplatformed in various different degrees. And the point is that this deplatforming stuff, Mark Andreessen is now saying that it's going to happen across all layers of the internet stack, including the ISPs, the internet service providers themselves, are going to deplatform. The cloud platforms, that's Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud, are going to deplatform. The CDNs, that's the content delivery networks, the payment networks, this is all of it. This is all every layer. So you can't exist on the internet, basically. Oh, kind of like what was the app that got Parler got shut down, and then AWS said, nope, you can't even use AWS, and yada, yada, yada. Anyway, even the browsers will ban you, so even if you could build a web page on your own, the browsers will be like, nope, we're not even going to point to your website, and the cloud hosting won't even hold you, and the CDNs won't even cache you, and the payment networks won't even work with you. So, like, you'll be thoroughly deplatformed, and that's what his point is, right? And he says the pressure is intense. Now, he would know, as the most connected person in all of geek land, of the Silicon Valley, and I mean Silicon Valley in the broad global sense of tech, he knows there's not a important person that he doesn't know intimately. And when he says the pressure is intense, he knows, because he invests in all of those companies. And he's talking with those CEOs. He's on the board of fucking Facebook. You don't think he knows what he's talking about when he talks about the pressure's intense on all of this deplatforming? Now, and then some guy responds to him by the name of Elon Musk. Elon Muskie. Elon Musk. Some guy named Elon Musk responds to Mark Andreessen saying, this is extremely concerning. Who is pushing this censorship and deplatforming? Question mark, as if he doesn't know, right? And he says, very shadowy. Right? So this Elon Musk guy, apparently he's into rockets and shit and electric cars. So he probably doesn't know anything about the internet. And he says, it's extremely concerning. Who's pushing this shadowy censorship? Now, apparently this Elon Musk guy is also trying to buy Twitter right now, which is kind of the center of this deplatforming stuff. And he's saying that he's buying Twitter precisely to stop that from happening, as his main reason for doing it. Now, it gets better, because the very next day, on Tuesday, April 20th, this Elon Musk guy says a totally separate, seemingly a separate tweet, saying, the woke mind virus is making Netflix unwatchable. Meaning they're canceling their own content.
I love that quote. The woke mind virus. That is awesome.
Is making Netflix unwatchable. And then somebody responds to him. Some guy named Pranay Patoli responds to this Elon Musk guy saying, woke mind virus is the biggest threat to civilization. And this Elon Musk guy says, yes.
Elon Musk. I love it.
I always thought it was socialism that was the biggest threat.
So Elon Musk says the woke mind virus is making Netflix unwatchable. Pranay Patoli says woke mind virus is the biggest threat to civilization. Elon Musk says yes as a response to him, essentially agreeing that the woke mind virus is the biggest threat to civilization. Now, that relates to what this and Mark Andreessen says about this cancellation culture is coming into tech in a very strong way, and it'll impact every layer of the tech stack. And the pressure is intense. And again, let me remind you, this Elon Musk guy said extremely concerning. Who's pushing this censorship deplatforming? Very shadowy. So something's going on. Whatever forces are leading to Twitter and Netflix and the likes banning and deplatforming, and YouTube, it's become a bit of a, as they're calling it, a woke mind virus sort of cancer that's spreading throughout the web. And Elon saying it's the biggest threat to civilization. And how many news articles did we read about what I'm telling you right now? Not fucking one. Nobody wrote about that. The biggest threat to Elon Musk is now acknowledging something as the biggest threat to civilization. Maybe that's worth writing about. Nah, fuck it. Let's write about what the cats are doing on TikTok. What's going on?
Almost sounds like a conspiracy.
What's going on? So,
Well, Tyler, I want to tell you, I listened to Barack Obama's speech yesterday. Okay, because uh, Andrea, who runs one of the political rooms, I forgot what it's called right now. It's 7 in the morning here, but she got like a live feed of it, and I can tell you, first of all, I thought he as usual, because he's a great orator. I thought it was a phenomenal speech. I mean, he touched on every single subject you could imagine in this space about disinformation, not just about the tech companies, not just about 230. But he very specifically said he's basically, and you have to be careful with his language, but he said he's a First Amendment absolutist. Okay, now First Amendment absolutist and free speech are not necessarily the same thing. He's basically saying, as a First Amendment absolutist, he doesn't want the government getting involved in restricting speech.
right,
Okay, but he did say, I mean, this is an area where I have some disagreement with him, having, been on corporate boards and everything. Um, he thought some of these private companies should look inward, find a North Star that is, or maybe multiple. I mean, I guess you can't really have multiple North Stars, but he used an expression like find a North Star other than profits. That at some point, think about what you're doing, and can't you make money without putting the worst nonsense on your platform. And he acknowledged, of course, that you know people going to look at things differently, because people do look at things differently. But he spent a lot of time really more talking about you know disinformation, whether it was coming from Russia, or the fact that half the country believes that the election was stolen, okay, and stuff like that. And that's the kind of disinformation he's talking about. But he also said something he's always said. I mean, I remember when he said it basically when he was president. He believes the best way of dealing with misinformation, or whatever you want to call it, is more information, is more speech. He doesn't believe that you combat disinformation effectively by restricting speech. He thinks, I remember a comment he made when he was president. He said, if someone wants to be a fool, don't try to shut him up. Just let him keep speaking. The longer the fool speaks, the more people will figure out the person's a fool. Um, and he kind of reiterated that yesterday. So I wouldn't say at all that Obama's speech was a call for censorship. It was a call really for private companies to exercise some restraint at the very tethers of what you might call free speech, but basically to allow most speech. Okay, but not, this is where it is. and he never specifically got into the Trump deplatforming. I would probably suggest if you would listen to his speech and apply it to Trump, he probably would not have thrown Trump off Twitter. He never said anything about it,
Hmm.
but that's the way I kind of view his speech. So anyway, I'm done speaking.
Tyler, I think that um, okay, I don't think it's quote unquote conspiracy, but I think what it is, it's that you have, all of academia is, let's say, to the left. Journalism is to the left. Um, and I know because I have a family member who I know was brought up under like libertarian values and then went to private high school, which was, libertarian, I mean, liberal, and then went to college and journalism school was liberal. And I witnessed this myself. And so this family member was like greatly swayed. It was like an avalanche that went pretty much against, the upbringing, which was libertarian. And so, I've seen how it's just so many universities and especially with the media, they're they're not purposely, you know, trying to be uh, propagandist in proliferating, let's say, woke thought. It's just that by the time that they get to be adults, they actually believe it. So the problem is that we have a media that is basically cheerleading the government. And the purpose of the media is to be critics of the government. And we no longer have that. But then aside from the government, in terms of like popular culture, they're also cheerleading a lot of this type of thinking. So the problem is we don't have critics. It's not outright propaganda because the only way you're going to be able to stomp out, let's say, misinformation is where we now become, authoritarian, and the government is actually censoring everything. That's the only way you can do it. And to Obama's point, you can't do that. But I think our media, the problem we have is they're not propagandists, but they're cheerleaders and not critics, and that's the problem. And so, I think that to Elon's point, the reason why I think he's probably saying it's the most critical thing, the biggest danger that we have is because you have this one type of thinking. And so now you go back to things like the virus that we were talking about, the last time that you had the show here. Um, you know, I'm not advocating Dr. Robert Malone. I think John was saying that he takes, one data set and it can be very dangerous. But what I'm advocating is for dissension to come up. I don't think that we should deplatform. Even if we disagree, I don't think we should deplatform because the day you deplatform somebody, somebody's going to come along with a truth that would be vital, let's say, to science, and you stomp them out, and humanity is a loser for it.
This is Irvin. I'm like on the second row here. Everybody throws around this woke thing, and I just really, it kind of gets underneath my skin. So I just want to put some tenor around it for true definition and understanding instead of us hanging it on everything. Woke is alert to injustice and discrimination in society. And then there's especially racism. But then there's another definition that says, way aware of and active, attentive to important facts and issues. So, it's not it's an action verb, which we should be aware of and be really, I know it's cool to hang it on everything, but it's not meant for everything. And some of
But
those things that,
it's become
yeah,
something
but
else, though,
just
Irvin.
because it's become, language is language and it has a meaning. and we can use it to either uplift or destroy.
Um,
And the other point I want to make is that not all academia is liberal. Not all news industries or news media is liberal. So I just when we start getting pejorative statements around certain classifications, it's like a bulb goes off, and I have to say something because it's not
Irvin,
true.
and since it's
I
right after what I
that's
said, I
from
just want to
academia.
respond to that really quick. I'm
If-
sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Catherine, but I have to respond because it came right after what I said. You're absolutely right. But in the case of, let's say, Fox, right? They were cheerleaders of the right. So yes, you're right. But not all the media is to the left, but the overwhelming number of media, mainstream media, is left. But even when you have something like Fox that is on the right, they're cheerleaders of the right for the most part, and it's never 100%, right? But it's an avalanche going one way or an avalanche going the other way. The problem is, it's hard to get critics. You do have some of them, but it's hard to get critics on Fox. It's hard to get critics to come out and to the surface where they're noticed on the left. There are, but like you don't hear them.
about the woke and academia being all indoctrinated and so on. This is like such a classic from like centuries and centuries of attempt of people that want to become like the next dictator to vilify academia, to shut them up, to put them into prison, because historically academics have been always known to be quite critical of dictators and systems like that because they point out things that are wrong. And this is such a classical move that's going on right now in the US and also in Europe and previously in Turkey. I mean, the last time something happened in Turkey, who was locked up first? Academia people. Because historically, academic scientists have been a threat to dictatorship and quite supportive of democracies and freedom of speech and thinking and so on. So I'm sorry to hear this in this room that we are that there are people here kind of helping that agenda, and also I'm kind of disappointed of Elon Musk because just think about universities are not there, or academics or scientists and so on are not out there to get anyone, rather the opposite, right? The innovations we have in society and in technology and so on are thanks to academia and academic thinking, and that everyone is free to speak here and to think and to have cell phones in their hand to speak here. It's all thanks to academia, research, and free thinkers. Innovation happens in free thinking places, of all kinds of different people. And the human rights, civil rights, all of this was elicited mostly by academic people and journalists and so on. So all these rights you have to speak here freely are mostly thanks to that, and I don't understand trying to vilify that. I'm sorry.
I don't
All
think
right,
anybody's trying to vilify, but I will say one thing that at universities, which used to be what you're talking about, first of all, not everybody's there for science, okay? There's all kinds of stupid degrees that are giving out that I just don't understand. And then the other thing is that when you have somebody who goes and speaks against a certain philosophical thought, they get shut down. You're not allowed to speak in certain universities. So that's the problem. It's not what you're saying, which is great in theory, and I think that's the way it was at one time. The danger is that it's no longer becoming that.
So,
So,
so
Katarina, while
uh,
I agree, it should be what you're saying. I think that it has to be pointed
But
out
who is
that we have to fight to make sure it
sorry,
no longer stays
people
that way. And unfortunately, we have way too many
that
examples right now
do people
of the fact that
that hurt
speech has been
other
shut down by the universities themselves because they have
just
caved in to a lot of the students' demands. And that's just
speak
dealing with
over
reality.
as a woman. Just reflect on your education, how you were brought up. And secondly, people are shut. The First Amendment, when you threaten public health and the safety of minorities and other people, that there's amendment in there, if you would read it, that this is not allowed. So speech that threatens other people's rights and that threatens public health is not freedom of speech. And if that is
Katerina,
shut down, okay, because I was brought up in a country that previously had Nazis running that country. So this is you cannot be tolerant towards intolerance. That's um, kind of, I don't know if you ever read philosophy. I welcome you to do it, but in a free world, you cannot tolerate intolerance. That's just how it is.
Uh, this is Rob, real quick. But Jorge, I didn't know if you had anything else to say, but I wanted to say something real quick.
yeah, I do, but I can see a red band.
Okay, real quick. I enjoy this exchange, but every time I hear, and I was interviewed by a magazine, a major magazine, a year ago, and one of the questions that I got was, well, how do we deal with today the worst of times or stuff like that? And, I'm always surprised at people who reflect about the past being the best of times. And my question to a lot of people are, tell me when was specifically the best of times, because for some reason, whether it's politicians or people who are against academics or academics, we always say today is the worst of times. And I would beg to differ. I think this is probably the best time to live in humankind, as a male, as a female, and I'm talking about on a aggregated level, as an academic, as a writer, as someone who speaks a different language. And again, my focus mostly is here, probably in the West. I don't know the rest of the world, but as an aggregated level, on the data, this is the best of time. So as people are anti-woke or pro-woke or this, that, and the other, there's more positives than negatives. And as to people who think the media at one time in the past was good, there's another side who said the media was too far to the right. So the pendulum always shifts.
Yeah, Robert, I agree with you. Yeah, I do study philosophy, Katerina. The question is always which philosophy you choose to study. I'm a big fan of objectivism, and for objectivism, the smallest minority is the individual. So there is such a thing as, the right of the individual. And so your rights end where my rights begin and vice versa. So you can have a majority that can be captured by the minority and vice versa. But if you protect the right of the individual, you've protected everybody, absolutely everybody. And I too was born in a foreign country, and the reason we had to leave because there was more revolutions, more years of revolution than there were years of independence at the time that I was born. So yeah, I understand what it's like to have a third world mentality and to be across other countries. And I also agree with you, Robert, that it's like it was never the good times. I agree with that, but I also agree that um, at least in this country, in the United States, oftentimes we'll say, well, if you go to other countries, we're so much better than other countries. I don't think that's the proper measuring stick. The measuring stick is by the U.S. Constitution. The further we drift away from the Constitution, the worse we are as a people, and the closer we respect the Constitution, the better we are as an institution. So, Katerina, I am in favor of minority, but it's the right of the individual, the smallest minority.
I mean, throwing into kind of support Jorge in the sense that, like, where not all universities, but there are some universities that are kind of, in my opinion, kind of indoctrinating that it's not free thought. And a good example of that is there was an interview with podcast of Joe Rogan and the North Korean escapee, and then she talks about her story, and at the end she talks about her joining the American education system. I forgot which university, and it was like I think like a socialism class or something. I forgot, not socialism, but something of that area, and she was saying how in that class the teacher was asking, "Oh, if a man opens the door for you, what does it mean?" And then she was saying that, "Oh, maybe he's, like just being a gentleman." And she actually said, "No, you're wrong. He's that's toxic masculinity, like that. It's like you can't even discuss this anymore. It just is what it is." And I don't think that's free thought. This is Pauline. I'm done speaking.
And that's exactly, um, uh, Irvin, since you brought it up, like I didn't realize what the original definition of woke was. And when I became aware of it, I thought, that makes sense, especially like in the Black community, that makes absolute sense. But it's something different. It's become something else. What what Pauline just mentioned is a perfect example of where woke is dangerous. The fact that you can't even have a conversation about that, right? And that's not government shutting you down. It's the mentality shutting you down. And that's what I think Elon Musk is referring to. And I agree.
Well, but you know what? If education is that bad, as everybody's saying, then why doesn't the market make the adjustment? Why continue to go to those schools that supposedly offend all of you guys? Go to another school. There's Hillsdale College; they do a great job. There's other colleges that you could go to. Why, why gravitate to the ones that offend you are those who are bringing this up? If there is some sort of academic mecca out there that pontificates in a manner that you feel that fits your values, why go there? Why are we focusing on the discussions on the ones that offend everybody?
Because they don't come up with innovation and they are not prestigious, right? So you want cherry picking. You want the most prestigious and most innovative places, but then you don't want that kind of teaching at the same time. So you want basically a clean, prestigious, um, only your mentality kind of teaching, right? And there are for sure other professors that are not like that. So it's also up to the professor, since it's kind of relative, pretty free in what they teach. You will also have in the same institution another professor, but maybe it's not as prestigious, right? So you want to force those institutions to have your mentality and be innovative and prestigious, so you get the degree from them.
Well, but that's also up to the alumni too. If the alumni really care that much, they can influence it. But the other opportunity for people who are just chasing prestige, if you are really all that good and great, why can't you make your institution prestigious wherever it is? The prestigious institutions that people are talking about today were at one time not prestigious. You could make San Diego State prestigious. You could make some other places prestigious by what you deliver, by what you do as an alumni and donate, by what you do to help build it to prestige versus buying into else's prestige that you're offended by. So there's a lot of opportunity out there. Let the market drive it.
Well,
Well,
some
But
other
Robert, in fairness,
people,
you do realize that the traditional ones, what the prestigious universities, have a massive head start because of their endowments. So I went to NYU, that is now more prestigious today than when I went there because of the things that you spoke about, because of money that it raised, and so it's come up the rankings, particularly on the undergraduate level. But it's still not considered, at least perceptionally, it's not considered as good as Columbia because Columbia had a massive head start. Okay. And the ones that have had that massive head start that've been around forever and have all the legacies and all of that. I mean, it's almost it's a massive built-in advantage than starting at San Diego State and trying to build up San Diego State to look like Harvard or Stanford. I mean, so you do need to
it's
acknowledge
not
that.
it's not just
On the other hand,
like a
on
good
the other hand,
neighborhood in the city, right? How does a neighborhood become expensive in the city and in other places? First, you have artists and free thinking, all these lefties that you don't like, moving into those places. Then galleries start, and some famous artists and people that are out there in the media start moving there, right? More lefties. And then it becomes attractive to all these lawyers and people that have real money. And the same is with those places that are prestigious for education. You need to attract uh, free thinkers, innovative thinkers that are starting to be well known or are well known, and those tend to gravitate to those places, right? And that's how you get prestigious. It's not pure money, exactly like you have the gentrification how it starts. It's not just money. And but that's exactly what I say. You want the prestige, you want the fanciness, but you don't want actually the mentality of the people, because I'm sorry, you're kind of backwards thinking to like not have women don't like the doors be opened by men, or tell them if they are allowed to get an abortion or not. This is not attractive for innovative people and that are free thinkers. It's not attractive for them. And that's why you keep being unattractive. And then you try to bully people into listening to you and crowd places with your mentality, because you're just not attractive for innovative, intelligent people.
Francine.
Well, wait. I have lived in Arizona for a long time, and I've taught at Arizona State University, not once, but twice. And the first time I taught at it, it was a party school known for, John Birchers and people who wanted to just have a good time in the good weather. The second time I taught at it, we had a new college president. The college president had, yes, raised a lot of money. He had attracted very high powered research professors. And over the past, I'm going to say 15 years, he has turned Arizona State University into one of the 10 top research universities in the country. And that is beyond the fact that, or in spite of the fact that Arizona is still a red state with, that's just restricted both voting rights and abortions. And yeah, it has some lefties, but not a lot. And it still has become a very free thinking research university, especially in healthcare and engineering. So I think that while there's some merit to what you said, Katerina, it's possible to do it anywhere.
Yeah, I would agree with that, that it is possible to do anywhere. Actually, a researcher by the name of Yao recently moved or is moving from Harvard to Tsinghua University in China, and that's actually a big move because he's going to devote his time full time, move his life from America to China to help China build up their mathematics program. So the pattern in academia traditionally is people tend to follow the supervisors. That's kind of the core of the idea. How you convince those people, whether it's with money or with some other kind of mechanism, that has always been kind of a contentious thing. Up until very recently, Silicon Valley was the only place where these things could happen, but now every country, including India, has shown that they too can do unicorns. So I think it's become very much decentralized, and anyone can do pretty much anything anywhere on the planet. It's just a matter of the kind of support that you have. So seeing China sniping the academics who are either unhappy or have their needs unmet here, well, looks like there's a lot of unhappy people here. And I'm just reminded of how communism got started just because somebody couldn't get a job at a newspaper. They were like, hey, you know what? I'm going to start a revolution. So it remains to be seen what revolution awaits for us.
I
Well,
didn't mean a
my point about
play.
what I was saying is
Of
exactly
course,
that. And Dr. Francine, thank you for your comment. And you nailed it about ASU. And actually, Smithsonian, they're a key part of the new observatory that's going in northern Chile, also. But anyway, the point is, yes, we have prestigious universities, but if you really have the resilience and really care or concerned about all this lefty stuff or righty stuff, wherever university you're at, if you're willing to put the backbone in it over time and you want to elevate it. It doesn't, you don't, when I say elevate and prestige, I'm not saying it has to be an Ivy League. I'm just saying if you care about certain things in prestige, give to your university, be a part of your university. Prestige comes from the alumni. And what's so fascinating is people who are chasing prestige and want to buy it end up not doing very prestigious things themselves. There are a lot of people who can bring prestige to their university and institution by what they deliver and share. So invest in your university. You can make your university more prestigious, not always the prestige is, but more prestigious.
So, Robert, in terms of prestige or not prestige, like, of education and quote unquote woke, it's kind of like, do you even have an opportunity to challenge, right? Because one of my friends, he's got a scholarship, so it wasn't really a choice. For some people, it's just, I just want the degree, and he's in computer science, but there's a lot of other courses that is kind of not related that you have to take. And I was talking to him about it, and I forgot what course it was, and I was really surprised how specific it was. He had to write a paper on why, I forgot what team that was that used the Native Indian mascot. It was so specific that the topic was write about why this is bad, right? And for me, it's less about whether it's right or wrong. Like most, like I'm more leaning towards like, yeah, probably there's cultural appropriation, etc. But it's the fact that there isn't even room to examine both sides, right? Because I was lucky enough to go through an education system where, for example, the topic of abortion, we examine both, for and against, and it almost feels like it's just like, this is wrong, write about why this is wrong, but you're not allowed to even question it, or you're gonna fail. That's more so the point, in my
So,
opinion.
Pauline, I grew up, and people like me grew up that way. And what our parents taught us is, and granted, it's suppression certain things, and I get that people want to speak up, but my folks taught us when you don't run it, you run around it until you own it. And so I get what you all are talking about, but I spent a fucking lifetime having to do what you guys are complaining about. You know what I mean? And I don't complain about it. I get what you're saying. I get the free speech, but I'll take a non social thing. I'm a geographer. Part of one of the things I do. We call Europe a continent, we call Asia a separate continent. But yet the rules say a continent is a contiguous landmass. So when I was in elementary school, I used to challenge the teachers about wait, you say these are the guidelines for a continent. If that is the case, why is Europe one and Asia the other? And they go, well, it's divided by the Ural Mountains. And I go, but the Ural Mountains are lower, not even at the elevation of the Alps or the Himalayas. So does that make Italy a separate continent? Does that make India a separate continent? And you know what my parents told me? Rob, just do as they say, and when you get older, you can challenge it. But the school didn't even like that. So I didn't fight it. I just like, okay, someday I'll influence it. So what I'm
Yeah,
saying is, yes, there will be differences, but sometimes you just move through it. You,
exactly. That's a great point. A friend of mine actually moved from our RPI to Waterloo here because the elective courses were so ridiculous. So universities also brand themselves by the kind of electives they make you or don't make you take. And the universities that are a little bit more technically focused, people who are technically focused themselves, do sometimes have, shortcomings perhaps in social development and other areas like that. So it's hard to balance out what is important and what isn't. But definitely the idea of some administrator or authority saying that Europe is its own separate continent from Asia is a little ridiculous. But that says more about Europe than anything else. So I love that story, Robert.
Okay, so I'll chime in with two little points before we transition back. One is that I think the university, rather than building up other universities, we're seeing things like Y Combinator be built up as alternatives to the traditional university systems, which are more, I guess, task oriented, for lack of a better word, um, and perhaps less theocratic or dogmatic, but not necessarily. Sometimes more so. But so I'll concede that point. But then the other point I want to make was I think we have to mention the sort of tech diaspora of what used to be thought of as creative problem solvers from California towards Texas and Florida that is underway, and that's a kind of a counterintuitive maneuver that I don't think anyone would have expected 5 years ago. So anyway. The the next big story is from the New York Times, and it says that as the European Union, known as the EU, prepares its now third landmark tech law in the last few years, the U.S. has enacted just two narrow federal tech laws in the past 25 years. So federal privacy bills, security legislation, and antitrust laws to address the power of tech giants have all failed to advance in Congress. Well, yeah, that's because we have this system of what's called K Street and lobbying and whatnot, which doesn't really fly in the same sort of way in Europe. So they're able to make more progress. Hillary Clinton jumped on Twitter about this to say, for too long, tech platforms have amplified disinformation and extremism with no accountability. The EU is poised to do something about it. I urge our transatlantic allies to push the Digital Services Act across the finish line and bolster global democracy before it's too late. So now you have simultaneously the first two biggest stories, by the way, of today. Number one, CNBC about Obama saying that social media firms' design choices contribute to polarization and calls for more transparency, and Section 230 reforms. On the same day, Hillary Clinton is tweeting about this New York Times story, applauding how the EU is moving forward and is hoping that the US does the same. Perhaps not. Those two people know each other very well. Clinton worked under Obama as his Secretary of State, no less.
Tyler, there's another big difference between Europe and the United States besides lobbyists, which is the parliamentary form of government. Once they form a government, because sometimes it's difficult to form a government with the coalitions, but once they form a government, that government basically is the government, and it can move in one direction. Because we have divided government, between the different houses and the president, and all, because our government's a little bit more divided. Not to mention our federalist system with the states, it is much more systemically. It is much more difficult to move in a single direction in the United States than it is in Europe. Europe, at least once they figure out how to form a government and they get the coalition, they could go off in whatever direction they want to go off on. It's just structurally much easier there.
Okay,
I'm
next
going to
up.
be, I'm just going to be a little bit contentious and just go for Occam's razor on this one. There is no technology business in Europe, and therefore they're able to do much more because they need to build a technology industry because they allowed for America, just like they allowed for Russia to take over their energy, they allowed America to take over all of the technology that powers Europe, and they are actively trying to counteract this.
Hoorah.
Okay, next up. I have the Reuters version. A bunch of people writing about this one, but here it is from Reuters. The headline reads, Twitter and Stripe. So that's Twitter. And Stripe is the payment layer underneath. For example, in Clubhouse, they use Stripe to enable the tip jar, for example. Twitter also allows Stripe to enable payments as a tip jar. You can see it on my own personal Twitter account or even on the Tech News Twitter account, TNATW. But that's about to get a lot more interesting. Like this headline alludes, it says Twitter and Stripe pilot cryptocurrency payments for creators. I told you. Did I tell you? Did I tell you that was coming? I told you that was coming. So Twitter,
Where's your cash register sound, Tyler?
yeah. And by the way, I'll tell you even more, which is that won't be the only way that cryptocurrency payments will be enabled on Twitter specifically. Twitter has shown an appetite to enable this, so this is not a surprise. I mean, I painted scenarios about this. In fact, I keep retelling the same story of how I interviewed Twitter's CFO in the earliest week, the first week that Twitter Spaces was born, and I asked him, "Is Twitter going to enable cryptocurrency payments for creators so that they can sell to each other with their ticketed Twitter Spaces and blah blah blah?" Well, here it is. That's the headline today. It just came out. It says Twitter and digital payments processor Stripe will pilot cryptocurrency payouts for selected users of its social media site content monetization products. They announced on Friday. That's today. Eligible users of Twitter's ticketed spaces. That's what I make spaces over there. And super followers program will be able to receive their earnings from the company in US dollar coins, a stable coin, USD coins, a stable coin whose value is pegged to the dollar. Twitter added that monetization features last year in an effort to integrate more into the creator economy and boost revenues. Now, I'll be the first to admit I was wrong about particularly which company they would lean on to enable this. I thought they were going to lean towards their own Jack Dorsey's company, which is now it used to be called Square. Now it's called Block. That just to me made a lot of sense because he's the same CEO of the same company. Although I care not which company they use, it was clear that Twitter has a bit of an appetite for wanting to enable cryptocurrency-like payments. And as I said, this is another part of the reason I believe that I have not really seen any journalists pick up on of why Elon Musk has such a particular interest, his real interest in Twitter, as the former leader of the first big global digital payment solution called PayPal. So I believe that the person who led PayPal dreamed of a day that there would be a platform where everybody was there and connected and could send funds to each other, and that they might be verified. And that's where my friend Nicholas, who's on stage, jumps in because he found a tweet when was this, Nicholas? In the past 24 hours? By this Elon Muskie guy again, is back in the news again because he jumped hot on the mic and twatted that he would like to see Twitter, if he gets control of it, that people would become verified. That is a key part of his vision for Twitter. And that's very interesting because then you're going to have verified people sending payments to each other, potentially through crypto. And as the a former leader of PayPal, a kind of aspired global payment solution, I think this is a big part of the reason why. Don't look at what he says, but kind of what he does, where he shouts out that he wants to save Twitter from what he thinks is the woke mind virus, but then his subtweeting is about how he would the changes that he'd actually really like to see at Twitter is verified accounts for everybody on Twitter. And no doubt this crypto payments thing fits into his own vision of where he would like to see Twitter go. Nicholas, did you have a thought about that?
Yeah, I
I
just
would
want
like,
to say two things.
wait,
One,
oh,
You want to let's let Francine go quick, and then
Francis.
go ahead, Francine.
I just want to say, that USDC, a stable coin, is a very timid step into
Yes,
Twitter,
yes,
into crypto. And if
true,
I were Elon Musk, the first thing I would change would be that.
right.
so I agree with Francine to some extent, but I don't agree that that will happen. So USDC is not even a real crypto. It's just Goldman Sachs, BlackRock. You just go onto Crunchbase, look at who all their shareholders are. They are trying to hijack the system. They are trying to hijack the opportunity, and people like Elon
Right.
will comply with every single regulation, every single
Mm.
oversight, every single surveillance capitalist move that is projected, and he just wants it for himself. And so we all have to look at this, and it's just so simple to understand. Just go to their shareholders. If they're raising money as VCs, they're not a decentralized cryptocurrency. They are a profit making entity that charges users even more than regular banks. They are not doing anything. They are fooling those who don't have the knowledge to understand. And all this is a bear hug, which has been going on since 2019, 2020, which they just basically ask for willing executioners, in inverted commas, to basically take money in exchange for abandoning all of their decentralization credentials. And they'll never empower the network to use truly decentralized currencies, which is probably the reason why Jack was unsuccessful, because if he was agitating for truly decentralized currencies to be used, it would still require a Coinbase, or it would still require KYC AML, which is entirely fine. It just needs not to be KYC AML that is compromising your privacy. And so, if you're afraid of being deplatformed from Twitter just for having opinions that people don't like, imagine if
Mm.
your business was tied to that, and you will never, ever risk saying anything that will get you deplatformed. This is a disaster for democracy, and Musk is a total charlatan in this respect. He compromises privacy wherever it is in his economic interest. Read Starlink, read China, read Xinjiang. He is a consummate professional in fooling the people to believe that he is something, in my opinion, that he is not.
I just invited Dawn up to see if she might have a thought on this. I think I should pin the.
Go, Nicholas. You've gone much further than I did, but in the same.
I just pinned the Stripe did a tweet of a animated video of the actual what exactly it looks like to make a purchase through Twitter using this U.S. Stable coin, and you can see it. And this is the a popularization of a technology in a meaningful, larger capacity than we've kind of seen before in a public, in a widely pedestrian public use case. So
Hi,
it's yes.
Donna here. Thanks.
Hey Don.
I agree. I agree with what Nicholas was saying. I think you're seeing between the government and very large entities, whether it is Circle, whether it is Coinbase, etc., the move towards a complete centralization under the guise that these are decentralized assets. Circle is now a public company. It is public. It has to make money for its shareholders. Its shareholders are not necessarily its users. They have different agendas. One is to make money for the shareholders. The other is the users think they're using a decentralized stablecoin, which of course is all KYC'd in the way that Nicholas is referring to as not in the best interest of going further in terms of being able to custody your own assets as well as your own identity. And I think that we're moving in a direction of more centralization, more government control, and pushing these decentralized applications, albeit the best ones, more even in that direction, as they themselves are going to have to comply with the travel with FATF and the travel rule and doing KYC. And there'll be outliers on the side, but they will probably have a tough time getting more and more users as these centralized entities gain more economic power. Thank you.
Hi, Annika here. I don't know if you have brought this up, but this finance inspection in Sweden, together with the EU, is looking to ban any coin with that draws too much power during minting for environmental reasons. So that will boost some, and Bitcoin may have a problem in the short term. Thank you.
again, it's worth pointing out that that is another classic centralized move, because running a private database is always going to be more uh, sustainably efficient than running even the most efficient decentralized protocol. So that's just a foil by which government can either centrally control, like the Chinese, the Russians, etc., or control via corporate surveillance. So I just feel desperately sorry for all of those people that are believing that they're somehow involved in a movement of freedom and empowerment when they are falling into a trap of further financial slavery.
Okay, so the next big story is that Mandiant, one third of says, and this is one of the biggest security companies in the world, owned by Google. It says one third of all hacker groups exploiting 0 days in 2021 were financially motivated criminals, as opposed to government-backed cyber espionage groups. So one third. They tried. It's funny how the phrasing of that makes you think that one thing, when in reality it's the opposite. One third of all hacker groups
Yeah, when
that
did you
were
stop beating your wife?
right, exactly. One third of all hacker groups were financially motivated criminals, not government-backed cyber espionage groups. Okay, so what were the other 2/3 then? Is the obvious question. What was motivating the other 2/3 of hackers? So if it wasn't finances. So the next is from the Wall Street Journal. They say they have sources that after churning out more than 500 original programs last year, Netflix is looking to add fewer new titles and focus more on quality while reining in spending. Streaming service Netflix spent lavishly on productions to win subscribers, but now growth has slowed, and Netflix stock is down, Jesus, 35% after their incredibly lackluster quarter earnings report. Holy shit, was that a real weak turnout. But they're looking back, there were hints. A month ago, there was a headline that we read that there was several hints that this was going to be a bad quarter. By the way, they said they told employees to reduce spending. They mentioned they're going to start going after passwords a month or so ago. These were all headlines leading up to the quarter report.
And
That
I told you all that they would come up with an advertising option model
model,
where
yes,
you get a cheaper subscription if you accepted advertising, and they acknowledged that on when they
indeed they did.
announced their numbers. Yeah.
We have another member of the correct prediction club. There you go, Ken. That's your prediction sound for you. You got that one right. You did call that. And the next story. Reuters investigation details Binance's effort to build ties with the Russian government, including handing over data on opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Oh, shit. CZ, what are you doing? In April 2021, Russia's financial intelligence unit met in Moscow with the regional head of Binance, the world's largest crypto exchange. Well,
What do you expect?
yeah, I was about to say, CZ, he's a weird cat.
He's controlled by others, as anyone is who's going to set themselves up in the way that he has. It's not decentralized. All of these people are the same. That you just have to look at the underlying. If it's not people powered, it's got some guy who can be compromised. That's the whole point of decentralization: is that you can't compromise and you can't,
Right.
coerce one person. CZ has been coerced so clearly; he broke all the rules, and then he, was basically forced to become compliant in all these other jurisdictions in order to hold his position. And he will, he's another one of the willing executioners, because he's a billionaire, so he doesn't care about anyone anymore, just like all the rest of them.
Okay, next up, the United States OCC says that Anchorage Digital, the first U.S. chartered digital asset bank, failed to adopt AML compliance program and has quote unquote begun corrective action. The company must appoint a compliance committee and hire a Bank Security Act officer, and it's the whole compliance game. New York Times: Warner Brothers Discovery will shut down CNN Plus on April 30th after its March 29th debut, just 1 month later.
And that was something else I predicted. Not the shutdown, but I said it would. I thought they would have a very difficult time, and I thought it would actually get merged into HBO Max, and it wouldn't be a separate service. But they made it even faster. They just shut the whole thing down. But I knew CNN Plus was not long for the world.
CNN Plus had 150,000 subscribers and was on pace to hit first year goals. According to the New York Times, the new corporate owners of CNN are moving to end the new streaming service after a splashy debut, where they spent a
Well,
reported.
by the way, they weren't on track to hit. I mean, their first year goal was 1 million to get to 7 million, and I think that out of the gate, I think they had like 100,000. I mean, not even 150. And I think the people running Discovery, who are the people really running Warner Media at this point, because they threw out most of the Warner Media folks, they looked at the early numbers and said we can't even see them hitting $1 million, and it's a very a million subscribers. So there was a very expensive endeavor. So I don't think they were hitting. I would. They were not hitting their early goals. They were missing.
Mhm.
I mean, who would
Um,
pay for that content anyway?
exactly right. That was the weird bit. The next is that Andreessen Horowitz launches a something called Crypto Research, a lab focused on Web3 breakthroughs that can contribute to deployable code, led by an academic named Tim Roughgarden, which sounds like an English version of a German last name, or a Germanic last name,
Or
Roughgarden.
band.
Um, Venture capital giant Andreessen Horowitz is diving deeper into the crypto market with the launch of a new academic lab called Crypto Research.
What a
Okay.
good way to influence the rest of the company, which are former employees of the government. So now they can quote an external source and put that in front of their paymasters in Congress and say, look at this independent research that we have
Yeah.
created,
It's starting
so
to
that
seem
you can be influenced and change policy to favor the companies that we have invested in and are pretending are decentralized. It's just a joke.
well similar, isn't it? Don't they play similar games in the pharmaceutical space? I imagine.
Every single area of the Western liberal democracies have traded, as Adam Smith warned. The invisible hand is not free markets, it is corporations writing laws and buying off politicians who are not capable of regulating because the world has become sufficiently complex that they outsource all of their decision making to experts who are in the pay
Think
of the
think
same
tank.
corporations. It's just a ridiculous, we have to get over this
Yeah.
somehow.
But
Well, this,
Nicholas, that's what Thomas Jefferson warned about when he warned of the perils of democracy, right? And Benjamin Franklin
if
said,
we can keep it.
"Democracy is two wolves and a lamb
And
voting what's for
Socrates.
dinner." Yes, and Socrates.
Yeah.
This is why we need to be well educated, which is why we need to have an allocation of our resources towards healthcare and education rather than putting money into weapons and the nonsense that we have been doing. We have just diverted ourselves down a blind alley of politicians who are incapable of leading and incapable of understanding, and the whole general population is so caught in a trauma loop of living paycheck to paycheck that they cannot exercise their freedoms and their votes because they know it's a complete waste of their time because nothing
Nicholas.
is going to change.
Nicholas,
Nicholas.
nothing was more apparent to me than precisely that when they were trying to work on the infrastructure bill and they added all these, Bitcoin and crypto, um, you know, uh, verbiage, and then they had a vote on it
and only maybe a handful of senators knew exactly anything about Bitcoin or cryptos in general, and they were voting on it. They were voting on it without any base of knowledge. And I started to extrapolate in my head and think, my God, how many bills are voted on in exactly the same way? It's very depressing.
Nicholas, you just said that we need to be highly educated. Uh, how do you? I mean, Tony Blair has proposed recently that 70% of our population should be university educated. What do you mean by highly educated?
I don't think I said highly educated. I said that we should be allocating funds to education that enables people to be conscious agents. That, as Einstein said, to understand is to know what to do. And most people don't understand. If you ask people how the internet works, they wouldn't understand. If you asked, how is it possible that we enjoy all these freemium services until 2019, people would not have understood that they were the product, and they are the product. And as such, we have a problem, which is that people cannot allocate time to being knowledgeable because they are forced into a, a trauma loop of existence, which makes them focus towards making money and surviving, and they are not educated in a way that enables free thinking.
Yeah,
It's the
Nicholas, but
system is broken.
surely that's a question of time. If kids, today's young kids know more about internet, and that over time, as long as we have schools and we educate them in schools about internet and metaverse, etc., the next generation will have a better understanding, and that's how
But
democracy
that's
progresses.
But
Well,
that's what's
that
happened
depends
though.
on perception field being controlled, because the hand that rocks the cradle is the problem. So I thought where you were going was that, the problem of universities is that they are, many people believe, miseducating our youth. I think it was raised before about, how universities work. And so the problem we have is that if we don't have systems that enable us to understand that we need credibly neutral information that presents both sides of the argument, that enables, actual thinking rather than indoctrination, that is the challenge. So having a school system that is, proposing a dogma that is, you know, antithetical to, some of the values and freedoms that we have is a problem. So the issue is democracy, not necessarily the purpose of education. So I agree with you, people will evolve, but it depends whether they evolve in a closed system that is controlled by people that don't want you to understand, that want you just to be a unit of labor in the economy, and that they want you to be in debt, and that they want to extract rent from you as a citizen. And we need to evolve from that so that we can elect better leaders who build a better world for citizens who can feel empowered.
Well, that you need to be Tyler and go and live on an island. Otherwise, it's impossible.
No, we need to take control of our democracies. It's not impossible. It's impossible when people say it's impossible, because that defeats the entire room and deflates people. It is possible. We can do it. And that's how the world evolves.
As long as we protect the right to vote.
No, that's just like the cost of admission. You have to do a lot more than just that.
Money out of politics. Has there
Remember,
ever been politics without money in it?
Not since
It can only
JFK
be
bought his
achieved,
election.
right? It can
Maybe a
only
hopeful.
be achieved
Well,
through
that's like saying, was there ever
decentralization.
money out of marriage?
I would
improbable is not impossible.
the Scandinavian parliaments are not nearly uh, as financially driven. I would say, in the same way that the American system is. It is, but not nearly to the degree from what I can observe. It's not as
Same
blatant.
with the British system. I don't think it's money driven. In fact, there's a money cap. You can't spend more than certain amount, otherwise you'll be going to jail.
It's not always about the money spent, it's about doing work that provides the information that informs the democratic decision makers. So, per this story, if you fund a think tank that produces information at zero cost versus someone who does not have the ability to produce that information, they have an asymmetry.
What's hilarious is this: whatever they fund is going to be cited as neutral in just a couple of years, and being like, according to an academic report, and then, yes, Congress, that's why we need this thing or whatever. That's the joy of you get to do hand in glove type kind of rhetoric and going, oh yeah, it's not us, this other group over here that's saying it. Totally different.
Yeah, but the interesting point is that it's a VC firm and not Facebook. I mean, we've seen articles of Facebook, influencing politics through, think tanks, and now we're seeing a VC firm getting into it. It's the first time that I'm aware of a VC playing at a similar game.
Oh, they're trying to legitimize the whole thing. They're basically like, so railroad barons did the same thing like 100 years ago, where it's like, well, we basically like monopolized, all the transportation. You've bought off half the politicians. You literally have like the amount of just we own everything is ridiculous. What you don't have is respect, because people don't believe that you earned your stuff legitimately. You basically stole it, and that's not entirely untrue. However, would they like to be respected and they like to move something? So a lot of them just went and founded a lot of universities. That's where we got things like Stanford from. Then they staffed it with a bunch of pro-genocide folk, and what's great about it is when you literally are responsible for creating a university, you can rewrite history indefinitely into the future. That's what an institution has the ability to do. So when we say Stanford ethics, you get Obama on there, talking about maybe we should regulate tech and other parts like that. It's a joke. Stanford can't even keep an accurate ethical history of their own institution. What makes us think that they're going to have any sort of actual respectable thing about anyone else's? When we have here with Ansty and Horowitz doing their own version for saying, hey, here's a Web3, it's a neutral academic university and such. I can guarantee you, whatever they put into a little think tank endowment for this, there's going to be some tax deductible charity variation spinoff if they don't already have that incorporated, and it's going to rewrite things from a distance, and they're going to pretend like they're not involved, and because this is the way that this is just the way that things are done. It's how you legitimize fortunes and you protect it over the long term, and you legitimize and make it people think that's normal, but it's not, but it will become so.
I mean, sadly, it is the norm, and the issue that we have is that people can't distinguish, and they won't be able to distinguish uh, what is true and what's not. We are post-truth and we are post-trust, and so there's only really one solution to this problem. And Andreessen are, in similar to you've got to look similarly to Elon, are meme kings. I would say maybe meme lords in this space, right? They have a massive position that they want to protect. And they want to protect it, and they've made active steps in compromise. Well, hiring people into their companies that are directly from government that have the ability to influence former colleagues. That alone should be banned. You should not be able to move from the government to from a corporation, from a government to the corporation, or corporation to the government. It's obviously a conflict of interest. But the issue is actually, if you look behind Andreessen, and if you were to look at who their limited partners are, so if you have a private equity fund, you have general partners, those are the people that manage the fund, and then you have limited partners, those are the people that invest in the fund. And you will see that the limited partners are the governments and the sovereign wealth funds and the pension funds of all of those entrenched interests. So you're really just in a circular loop. And ultimately, that's the reason why nothing will ever change unless we can create technologies that enable privacy in order to create self evident truths that are going to be publicly maintained on distributed ledgers, and to do that efficiently.
Okay. So, Google plans to effectively block third-party call recording apps from their Play Store starting May 11th. So no more third-party call recording apps in Google land. Next, BBC says that the
Is
UK's
Clubhouse a call recording app?
Say again?
Is Clubhouse a call recording app?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's a very interesting question. Yeah, I don't
Well,
know.
you can do it natively inside of Android anyway. So this is an interesting decision. Obviously, the thinking must being that there is no definitive, obvious reason why you would need a third party app to do what the OS does natively. This is just an attack vector.
Based on accessibility APIs, and so I don't imagine that Clubhouse is using these particular accessibility APIs.
We've seen that they're pushing their own anyway, right? Like they showed off at the Google Cloud event, I believe it was last year. They showed off sort of like the voice to text and text back to speech again and everything else, and the son talking to his deaf father for the first time and that kind of thing. So, you know, if their inbuilt one is inherently better and is going that way and has all the accessibility, then again, why have these third party ones? And by taking them off as well, if any of them had any nice features, it means that they can just copy them and absorb them shamelessly.
So
The
the
point is not about recording the conversation, it's about the accessibility to API.
Well,
Because
people were
if you,
using the accessibility API to go around that policy.
yeah, so that's the Google want to fix. It
I think
says if your pre-installed dialer app has this recording feature, you can still use it. But if you are using the third party applications, you can't have this dialer.
Google would Google would prefer to have a monopoly on this because AI transcription on device is something that they like to have as a thing. They don't want competitors to that. So they're basically removing competition from this. Most things Google do that does their pro privacy are very self serving in a pro privacy in a very quote unquote privacy version of things. Uh,
Yeah, we could
and
record
they
you
have
without
competitive
permission,
interests every
but you
time they
can't.
advance a position.
Agreed. That's if you read that document, it's about being unaware. But at the end of the day, everything is recorded by them. So you're exactly right, Chris. This is just about, it signals well in terms of privacy, but it's really just enabling them to maintain their monopoly.
Advertising company that advanced surveillance capitalism has a mild annoyance at other groups encroaching on its turf would be a more accurate version of this. And
100%.
yeah,
okay,
well, it's
next,
like no different. Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
Apple started blocking that the cookies for advertising, right? So it seemed like it was helping the consumer, but it just made them more powerful in the
Right,
ecosystem.
right. So the UK's Department of Transport outlines rules for self-driving vehicles in the UK, including letting drivers watch TV while they drive, quote unquote, ahead of a full framework which to be coming out in 2025. People using self-driving cars will be allowed to watch television on built-in screens under proposed updates to the new code. And then CNBC and everyone else is reporting on a filing from this Elon Musky character, who sure is in the news a lot today. He
he owns
apparently,
the news in the near future.
yeah, he has secured $46.5 billion to acquire Twitter, including $25.5 billion in debt financing via Morgan Stanley and other firms, and is exploring this kind of hard takeover approach.
End of an era.
Yeah,
Relating back
Tyler,
to your previous
I
story about the
I
insurance,
also tweeted that, but I also said that did you know that the cost of war in Ukraine is going to cost, according to the World Bank, $60 billion to put things right from what's happened. So it puts everything in perspective.
Oh, there we go. Just the threat of Cold War and like unleashing nukes in World War III. Just the price of a Twitter acquisition. Okay, well that helps put things in perspective.
to go back to your insurance point and note that Musk also tweeted about insurance, whereby they will use the data coming from your car, surprise, surprise, to insure you now, so that it will be, again, their move into finance. And similarly, the move into finance will come through his Twitter acquisition, as we know, which will be followed with all of that surveillance capitalism that we love so much.
I mean, they already use your phones to determine a lot of insurance stuff for your car for your driving insurance.
Okay.
Now
Like
it's
I
being made
remember I
explicit.
want to say 8 years ago, they started a program. I think it was about 8 years ago. They started a program in Australia. I think it was called Journey, like through Discover, and basically they were it was like an opt-in program where they would apply machine learning models to like the accelerometer on your phone to determine your driving patterns to see if you were like a safe or unsafe driver, and then that would impact your premiums.
They have a plugin here that Progressive uses that monitors your driving. So it's not, of course, data is going to be useful in that, but it's the point that Musk can turn your car off, of course, as can if you're a part of that story, you can be deplatformed from your car. So you really are just a renter.
So one fun version of this. So there was a hurricane that was happening, and one of the things that Tesla did is a software update, which was very impressive to a lot of Wall Street traders, and has all sorts of commentary. They're saying, "All right, we've unlocked a speed upgrade for all the Tesla owners to allow all the cars to drive 15% faster, so they can escape the traffic, can escape the hurricane." And it's like, wow, that's really cool. Tesla's doing a thing. And then the engineers are kind of raising their eyebrows, going, "What do you mean it drives 15% faster? Why does it do that all the time?" And part of it was two parts. One was that they said, oh well, this will ruin the batteries when you do it, but it's emergency, whatever. But the more interesting one was actually the fact that they had the software capability of shipping crippled cars like that lack certain capabilities, like being able to drive above a certain amount, and then as a part of your subscription you can pay to drive above a certain amount and then have that as an upgrade. But when you have basic functions like go forward, go straight, and then there's a software switch about whether or not you're allowed to go that speed, not because of, legal principles or safety mechanism or anything like that, just because of, we shouldn't have people allowed to drive fast just because they haven't paid their bills. You're going to have more and more basic versions of this for, things like, seat warmers, whether or not essentially your seat goes all the way back, and then every
Chris,
aspect of life
the
becomes a
metaphor comes
transaction as to something you
full
use a
circle.
subscription fee for, and this is getting absurd.
The
Chris,
To
is
say
metaphor
it
comes
nothing of
full
the happy
circle.
is not
It's
fun in this
literal.
context.
It's literal throttling.
So the interesting, Chris, I think what you're talking about, Ben, here is range. I think you're saying range rather than speed, but I know exactly what you mean. It's the same principle. I think what happened is they took the 75 kilowatt hour. Basically, I think, and this is guesswork, but that they fitted 75 kilowatt hour battery packs to a bunch of the Teslas, specifically S's, but they were selling a lot of them as rated at 60 kilowatt hour packs. So they unlocked the extra range in a software unlock, and as you say, this. I think that's what happened. But regardless, the whole principle of is that okay is a difficult one, isn't it? Because on one hand, clearly, why the hell am I paying a company to tweak the software to unlock the capacity of the battery pack I've already got? On the other hand, would you want them to produce things a different way if it's less efficient? Would you want them to, if it costs more to make
But
your car because you have to decide whether you put seat
Ben,
heaters in or not? So that's the flip side of it.
Ben, isn't the question whether if you can control the speed of the car, why do you need a plaid that can go at 150 miles an hour? Because if the government says to you, well, the speed limit on the highway here in the US is 65 miles an hour, anyone who's driving a Tesla should always be kept.
No, well, obviously, I don't.
Uh,
Yeah,
just looking it up, Ben, because you called me out on that with things. You are accurate with things. It was. I was wrong. It was
it
not
was
the
range,
speed. It was
range
the
over
range.
speed. Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah, that's fine. But it's quite interesting to think about whether um, that whole model, if it's cheaper to just build all the cars the same and then sell off these extra upgrades as upgrades when they're just a software unlock. What is that all about? Is that okay? Is it not okay? Um, I mean, obviously, going back to Nicholas's point, the fact that you're effectively renting the car, if you take a full life cycle view on the car, then tangibly your battery pack will be worth more at the end of the period if you if it is throttled to 60 kilowatt hours of its 75 available, it'll actually be a more valuable pack at the end. So that factors in a little bit, which I wonder how it changes the argument, because you're using it less and putting less
But
strain on it.
Ben, what about the fact that if we have software-controlled vehicles and the government regulates those companies and that they can avoid people dying on the road, etc., and then all these good reasons, why don't they just they're automatically self-driving in the future. Nobody will need a car that goes above the speed limit because the government will ensure that the software prevents you from having that agency, which is entirely fine if you believe that 65 miles an hour is the right speed and
This has
you're
been done
willing to go along with
historically.
it.
Says during that they did 2 years essentially. They were saying during the 70s, I think it was, and they're saying let's save on fuel and put a maximum speed on the highways. They ended up finding out later that it actually caused a slight increase in energy consumption because of there ended up being like some supply chain issues that stacked on. Another time that they tried the speed limit stuff was actually during was during one of the wars. It was one of the other time frames, but it's because the highways are a lot of post World War II in America. But a lot of these policies, when you actually dig into them about which legislatures were sponsored, etc., you find out there's rarely for the reasons that are actually said, especially in anything related to vehicles or oil, because you have almost complete regulatory capture in these cases. So a lot of these typically have something happening overseas with foreign policy, and this is one of those factors. What's interesting for Tesla in saying whether we should rent our vehicles or not, or whether or not we should own nothing and be happy. One of the things is that Musk has actually put this in his tweets with things talking about how buy the self-driving car package while you can, because in the future we won't actually sell Teslas, we'll rent them out. Which causes another buying frenzy, and people get all excited about that. But we're going to this pattern where is it physically possible to own anything? And for the people that are actually able to own property versus not own property, because it's not even physically available to have because it's all rented out and the technological complexity prevents people from actually having the manufacturing capacity, you're going to have a very, very different society from what you have right now. It's going to look very neo feudal very quickly, or it might create some new versions. But we're not talking enough about the kind of society that we want. We're just reading out the momentary developments, like the moment to moment actions, rather than considering the long term implications of what kind of a society we actually want to build. And if we don't plan that far out, we're just going to get whoever has the most financial interest in seeing that future, and it might not be the one that benefits the most people.
That's absolutely for certain. I mean, that's the model that that corporate surveillance works under. And I don't understand why people aren't more concerned that not only will be renters of everything, it will be the Dollar Shave Club of life. You will not have enough capital, which means that most people are living paycheck to paycheck. They're in the trauma loop. They would not have sufficient savings to deal with a crisis. They do not have 3 months of savings in typical American society, and this means that you have very little agency, and the feudal or the turning America into a peasantry is in full swing. You've got guys with billions and billions of dollars of net worth that are completely in league with the regulators, and it will become impossible to compete with them in the same way it's impossible to compete with Facebook and Instagram and Google and Apple. And so you will get a new type of ruling elite that is not much different to the oligarchy, and you will have to go along with what they say, or otherwise you will be deplatformed. You will not be able to drive your car. You will not be able to have, conscious agency.
Very briefly, and I know that we've kind of been a little bit of time on this topic, but just very briefly, 16 Tons is a wonderful song about 16 tons. What do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. Saying, Peter, don't you call me because I can't go because I owe my soul to the company's store. Kind of a comical version of this, but it's really sad that the context of it, where the more that you work, the less you actually have agency. That's from a recent history that's only from like the 1920s and 30s, from when people would work and the only place that they could actually shop would be at a single place because they're not paid in a universal currency. They're paid in a local one that's only applicable to the single company they're working for, which can also control the price of things on either way, not just the wages, but the prices of what you're paying. When you can control both sides of that transaction, it can be whatever you want. And in this case, they'd put it to one that has permanent debt, very much similar to the sharecropping model that kept a lot of freed slaves in the South permanently stuck in debt as a similar instrument. We don't. This isn't some abstraction of a far distant time in history. This is something that we have very recent financial models, and is only relatively an exception for like one, maybe two generations that did not have this as the norm. So when we're eagerly cheering on the return of subscription models for everything, yeah, that makes your financials look great and allows you to take lifetime earnings up front. You say lifetime earnings of a customer. Eventually you get to the point where you cannot compete with these services because they're so heavily capitalized. And then what you're left with is an infrastructure that you have to rent to do basic existence. And when you're at that point, you control both sides of that transaction. We're now back to the prior model, which normally involves a great deal of bloodshed to fix, and we'd really like to avoid that. So that's kind of the thing we're trying to steer off here.
So my personal recipe, Chris, for doing something about this, one part of this two-part recipe came easy for me, and the other part was really hard emotionally. So the bit that came easy was learning some first principles, specifically about the physical world, physics, and about the psychological world, a little bit about human behavior. So some of that I was lucky enough to have. And then the thing I didn't have was the second part of the recipe, which is spend less than you earn. Do whatever it takes to spend less than you earn and save the rest. That was really hard. I was 35 with a big car that I couldn't afford and God knows what before I finally realized, shit, you know what? I could keep doing this, but I'm not going to. And I took that big car and took it back to the dealership and I cried on a train on the way home. And then rented a tiny little car for a few years, and now I can have whatever car I want. But that was a hard move. Something in the society had not taught me that I do need to spend less than I earn and save the rest. If you can
Such an
do that,
important.
and you can derive your own points of view from first principles, insulating you against this Anthony, the previous article about this Web3 think tank and whatever. Then you're in a slightly better position. But it's all very well to say think from first principles. You need to have a grasp of first principles to do that. I'd love to
And
hear
you
other
need
people's
Which you
suggestions.
need a good education system for, right? That's the point. That they're not educating people in schools about this.
you're
Well,
absolutely
I mean,
right, Nicholas.
I homeschool unschool my kids, so I couldn't agree with you more, Nicholas. But sorry to interrupt, whoever that was.
Pat.
Sorry, that was Pat. And I agree with everything that Ben has said and everything that Nicholas has said. The thing is that you have been in a very fortunate position, Ben, in that you were able to discern all these things with not too much help and come to those decisions. And I think we have all been given the opportunities over the last decades to actually gain that discernment, but we can only do it at whatever pace we can, or our own inner body workings allow us to discern. And so it's very interesting, but all the things are in place because all of these crises are now ratcheting up in such a way, but they're still giving us opportunities to actually learn more, to understand more, and discern more. So technology and the internet, social media and all that is giving more people around the world a chance to actually see and take those bits of information in to compare and contrast within themselves and reflect against their own understanding to discern. However, it's like we can only do it at a specific time. The universe only allows us so much leeway to do things, and we can't force the issue, etc. We are evolving to that place that Nicholas described so very, very well. The trouble is, of course, that while all those things are there and accessible to us if we choose, it's all being wound up so tightly, and all the crises come along and ratchet things up to another level, and we're being wound up like a spring that I fear will just come to a point where it goes bing and it explodes all over the place just because it has to, because all of these conditions that are creating such stress, and I've had a most stressful day caused by all sorts of nonsenses from the past where people have chosen to do things that are greedy or want more and more and more in their lives and to gain more and more financial benefit out of my little bank book and so on and so forth. And it's going to come a time where we have to adjust our concepts of what is important in life. We've got all the things in our reality just now. We just don't seem to be able to engage them all together and to move forward. And so we have the difficulties with the education system, with food crisis, with immigration, with all of those things, and of course, climate change. Now, which is going to happen first? Big question. So I don't know. It's been a really awful day as far as I'm
But
concerned. So I'm really
Pat,
sounding here. Yeah.
Pat,
Sorry. Go
you
on.
mentioned something that was critical. It's that time is the most precious commodity that we have. And so, because the lack of time and the lack of education on how to properly prioritize, we naturally start to gravitate towards the convenient, and then the convenient is bringing us back to what got us into the problem in the first place, where we, out of convenience, will just go to these apps and, they're free, and then we're milk cows again for our data. And
But
and
that's the
so
easy road out,
that's correct. And
Jorge.
so that's I think what happens is the lack of education. Okay, so we're just going to gravitate and take the lazy way out for what's convenient, and the traps are so easy to get into. That's the problem. They're easy.
So time
There is a foundational physics point there. Sorry to interrupt you, Ben, but it is about the foundational thought there. So time is the inelastic supply that we are unaware how long we have. So that is the condition that creates the impetus for life. But we have to note that, again, the second law is of conservation of energy, and the beauty of um, the Google and Apple and Amazon model is that it serves the second law directly, because you conserve energy in order to free up time. And by making it frictionless, we have to say, well, how is it frictionless? Well, that's friction is removed by people like Andreessen subsidizing massive loss making to create massive capital asymmetries, all funded by the same governments, they said, the limited partners that fund those vehicles. And so this is a system we can understand from first principles. It is exactly adhering to physics and the conservation of energy. And humans, when they are in the trauma loop and living paycheck to paycheck, will always solve for time and speed. And that's why we will only wait a nanosecond for a click or for a checkout, etc. And the only way historically we can deal with that is by having massive centralized, uh, basically subsidized network effects, which are provided to you by your friendly VCs.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Element of
That was a perfect segue. Yeah, go ahead. Who was that? Was that Pam?
Pat,
And
just
Pat.
just very quickly, Ben, I really do want to hear what you have to say. I just wanted to point out that what Nicholas is talking about there is really something that's very important, and it's the paradox. All of the things you're saying, yes, the ease of convenience, the easy road, and even your decentralized system, the paradox of it all is not about what uh, the gain, the financial gain, the whatever. It's about being able to recognize that we all have a part of this, and everything we do must relate positively to each other. There is no way we will go forward, and history is there to prove us. The paradox is we have got to change our entire basis on which we perceive our lives here on the earth.
Oh, wow. So I've got 3 points here, which I'll try and make them very brief. One thought was, it feeds very much into what Pam and Nicholas have said. One thought is about prioritization. The idea we haven't got time is always an illusion. It's what do we do with that time? So we come on that, and then the irony of this is not lost on me, that I'm on a social media app putting off some longer term, lower time preference activities, or trying to do them simultaneously in order to have this conversation. So that's ironic and ridiculous and hypocritical. So forgive that. But this stuff's highly addictive, and it gives us hits, and there's too much information out there, and it's too easy to go and get the latest information rather than to turn the phone off and to go and read a book on physics, maths, history, geography, politics, psychology, and to arm yourself with that little bit of time you spend studying the fundamentals with the ability to discern the next 1,000 pieces of crap that come flying at you when you do turn your phone back on. It's just difficult to underestimate how much discernment you can learn with a small amount of first principles. I pipe up here when I hear things that are not right from the domains I understand, and it's very freeing and easy. It's very easy to spot bullshit when you understand the domain. When you don't, then it's hard, and you've got to go learn the first principles. But spend a little bit of time, longer time preference on investing in the longer term. You never know when you're going to die, so that's a difficult thing as well, as you say, Nicholas. But invest that time, you increase your discernment, and then there is less stuff to filter and less difficulty in knowing what to believe. That's the one point. I won't make the other two right now because one's enough.
Ben, it's absolutely true. I mean, in my case, I've stopped watching the news. I'll get up at 7 and watch maybe 15 minutes, and then everything is just a rehash of the same thing, right? You can hear something once. You don't need to hear it 10 times throughout the day. But then
The
gravitating
clue's in
towards
the
books.
name, George. News, right? It's the plural of new. It's only on there because it's new and
Exactly.
unusual.
Maybe they should change it to repetition. Oh, let's watch the repetition. But the other thing too is I think that when we were talking about education and curriculum, I think it's important that philosophy that is a component of everyone's education, to learn how to think, to learn how to find the contradictions, because it is one big illusion, I mean, we're hit with so much information. How do you decipher? And the problem is when people don't know how to critically think. So I think philosophy and knowing the basics of how to find a contradiction, because in the universe there are no contradictions, and logic, Aristotle is the father of logic, and he defined it as the art of non-contradictory identification. And I think that that's critical. People don't discern the obvious contradictions that are out there, and it confuses them as well.
It's a big weakness in the human brain is that we don't have an inbuilt mechanism for discerning all contradictions. We don't automatically prevent ourselves from holding contradictory beliefs. So we do hold contradictory beliefs, and quite disturbing. Nicholas, you had a point about thermodynamics. I don't know whether to briefly build on it, but it made me think that humanity as a whole. There was 2 points. The other 2 points. One was about dependence, interdependence. I'll do that in a bit. But there's a bit about thermodynamics. I have my interpretation of the three laws of thermodynamics is number one, the best you can do is break even. So you're never going to get free energy. Number two, you can only break even at absolute zero. And number three, you can't get to absolute zero in a finite number of steps. I think what we're missing so mapping that to this whole gratification and what you're saying, if I'm understanding you right, Nicholas, is that it is more conservative of our individual energy to go and get something through the mechanism of a highly invested corporation, and get it at low marginal cost. Is that effectively what you're saying? We're conserving our own energy in order to go and do the
Correct.
easy
We
thing.
are powered. If you think about us as
So
units of
just to finish the point, and then I just wanted to make
energy.
sure my
Sorry.
assumption was right.
Yeah.
The best you can do is break even. Cool, get that. There's no free lunch. Happy with that. Number two, you can only break even at absolute zero. And I think what they tell us in thermodynamics, but what they're not telling us, or maybe we haven't twigged, is number three, you can't get to absolute zero. There is this utopia that we all head towards where everything is zero marginal cost, and that probably doesn't exist if that story follows the same story as thermodynamics. Anyway.
Well, just to speak to Jorge's point and to your point, I think that what we need to do is it's not a specific point. Well, it is specific in that we are units of energy as humans, and we are requiring a certain amount of calorific energy to power ourselves, and we need shelter, and we need a democracy to operate in order to have a purpose, right? That would be my best way of defining what we're trying to do as humans. And then the question is that can we, and so the point to Jorge's point was that we form our societies through consensus. So there is no subjective truth, well, objective truth. There's subjective truths. If you take Gandhi's words, or if you take Kellyanne Conway's words, alternative facts. And so we need to understand that as a society, we have to come to consensus, but that consensus has to be built on accurate information. Just as humans, we have perceptions, which are our five senses, and a little bit of inherited learning, and we take a guess at how something is going to turn out, and then we score how close we were to our best guess. That's how machine learning works. That's how Bayes' theorem works. It's a probability in an information field. And what I want everyone to try and recognize is that if we can evolve our technology in order to have good input data, information, you won't have to read every book, because you will have a suite of self-evident truths that social consensus has established and can avoid misinformation and disinformation. And so what worries me is if someone holds that information, that library, or if any one group controls that, then you lose the ability to even discern that truth. And that's where we have got to. People are informed, the social consensus was informed about the Brexit through Facebook. And it was informed about the election and, all of the nonsense through misinformation, and that was easy to do. And that was goes back to Obama's point and to Clinton's point, but in terms of the earlier part of the call, right? And so what we must understand is that in the new technologies we have will enable us to establish consensus based on self-evident cryptographic proofs that are not controlled by centralized powers. And what they're trying to do with the economic tools, like Musk can see, is that that becomes massively powerful. And Andreessen wants to be a player, and Musk wants to be a player, and Putin is a player, and Xi is a player. And the people need to realize we need to rise up and understand that we have a right to privacy, and we have a right to truth, and we can only use public ledgers to do this.
Yeah, Nicholas, that sounds great, but I mean, the people will never rise up. They're going to follow, unfortunately. It's
That's why you
just the
need
way it is.
economic incentives. Okay, so you're right if you don't have economic incentives. But we can see that network effects purchased by VCs are enabling trillion-dollar companies. And we are not stupid. So we can take those same economic incentives and own them ourselves, because if we have an alternative to Google, an alternative to these other these platforms, these surveillance capitalist platforms, we can own them ourselves and be the owners of the trillion-dollar network, because we are the input. It
So,
is a
Nicholas,
closed system.
who's
It's
we?
physics.
Nicholas, who's we, and how are you going to bring all these
We,
people
the
together
people.
to create the same kind of wealth to be able to do that? I don't
Well,
follow the
it's
mechanism.
well. Then one needs to understand how Bitcoin works, because whether you agree with Bitcoin or not, it establishes a way to have value that is owned by a community, and it is has been up at $1 trillion, so it is equivalent to a Facebook. It is equivalent to it's much more valuable than Twitter, right? And it's being co-opted. This is a proof that you can have publicly owned infrastructure. It enables people to cooperate trustlessly. So the problem has been solved. The issue is people are being brought into the centralized version in order to fool them, rather than saying, oh my goodness, what we need to do is evolve the UTXO technology of Satoshi Nakamoto, which is a mathematical proof. And we can do that. We just have to wake people up. So the way you wake them up is you offer them an economic incentive, or any incentive that motivates them to use the new service rather than the existing.
The whole movement of Web3 is about, I guess, creating platforms and vehicles for people to unite and attempt to do this. So it'll be very interesting to see where we go from there.
As long as it's not hijacked by Andreessen, then it's fine. But the problem is, you get people, just like you got in the financial world on Wall Street, you get willing, smart people who, tell a good story, but at the end of the day, they're selling their souls because they want to do the big round, and they want to glad hand their way around Silicon Valley. And these big boy VCs pat them on the back and make them feel good. And then you get, Robin Hood and the PFOF and the AMC and all of that, meme stocks. They're behind all of it. They're part of
Nicholas,
all of it.
that is exactly right, and that's my fear is that okay, competition is good, but then the message can get lost in the competition. So yesterday I was in a Zoom. I had to give a talk in front of 350 CMOs in Latin America, and they're a little further behind on the learning curve of where we're moving with the whole digital asset world. And they had speaker from Meta and Oracle and so forth. I was the only person speaking about Bitcoin. Where my whole focus was on Bitcoin and the rise of the CBDCs and, like a cancer, potential loss to liberty and the things that we need to wake up to. But they just wanted to hear about the NFTs and the metaverse and how, their companies can participate. So, you have that economic incentive, which is very, very strong. But when you have a lot of voices there, you just get lost.
So, George, this is where turn the news off for a little bit, study the first principles. You take the time, and very few people have, to understand Bitcoin, then from that perspective, you can judge all these other projects. but it's old and it's been around a while, and it's not so exciting, and the price isn't moving so fast. But that's the fundamental work you need to do if you then want to better understand what the next step is building on top of it. From that perspective of having some understanding of it, and I only claim a limited understanding, a lot of the other claims made can be immediately debunked by fundamental computer science principles such as the Oracle problem and others. So that's the starting point of the learning to
Ben,
discriminate in this space.
Ben, yeah, I had it. Listen, I only had 20 minutes. So, I've learned that you can have some very intelligent people with PhDs and so forth that really have such little understanding about money. And so where I chose to go was take them down a quick history of money because, in my view, the two greatest inventions in the history of humanity. The number one greatest invention was the noun, right? Because without the noun, you can't communicate concepts. This tree, that tree, those trees, the forest, etc. And then the second one was money because that's where we were able to get out of the tribe and go and build civilizations and planes, trains, automobiles, and rocket ships to the moon and all that stuff, right? And so they had to understand that the internet was the extension of the noun, and that Bitcoin, which is transferring value across the internet, was the extension of money. And but the problem is you have to start with the basics, and everybody's just too enamored with, oh shit, Board 8 Yacht Club, it's going at
But
600,000
it's
from
okay
Snoop
because a lot
Dogg.
of it just won't work technically in the long term. So it's okay; it'll shake out.
Ben,
The,
I wanted to ask this question for a long period of time. The way Nicholas paints this picture, and I know he has a clear view about this, like this decentralization and all that, it's totally understandable the way, every single time this, answer comes up that we have to start thinking about the blockchain, the way it takes care of it and the way it works. But the thing is, like the way Nicholas actually paints the whole picture that how the future would be in decentralized way. I mean, we are talking about like whatever we're going to do, whatever the information we're going to put in public, like sharing in the social network and all of that, and ultimately will become decentralized framework. I mean, do you really think that that's possible? That all that information can go on and it would be accessible in the same speed and same functionality and everything, and all
Karan, let
that
me
data
answer
has
that.
to go on these decentralized way. How is it even
Karan,
possible? Yeah.
let me explain that because we're involved in doing that. You don't store the data. That's the big mistake that people think, is that you're going to store this data on chain, or that you're going to have a central repository. No, you're going to have two things you need to understand. One is that you use the UTXO, or the security of the blockchain, and then you have to have at the primitive level identity. That's why I always talk about self-sovereign identity. It's the big thing that most people don't yet understand. And it goes to Jorge's point, which is that you could actually simplify your speech to the CBDCs, or the evolution of money, and understand that, and this is to Dave's favorite subject, I suspect, that John said in the beginning there was the word. Well, the word is how value is actually transferred, because it's how you communicate, and it's how contract is created, and all money is a form of social contract. That's what fiat means, and that's how everything is effectively transacted through words in forms of contract. And so, at
Nick,
in the most reductive, if I can just finish the point, in the most reductive way, therefore, once you have security that is secured by the public and rewards the public for that security, agreed, it needs to be an efficient proof, but let's just assume that can be done, and it has been done. The second thing that you need is identity, in order to have that self-sovereignty to put that information into a place that is a public ledger, and then you need privacy. And in understanding that, you need to understand the evolution of cryptography, which is zero knowledge proofs. That is where I can prove something to you without compromising the underlying data, to the extent that you will accept it as provably true. And as such, that does exist now. So now, if you understand that you can have information identity, which is just words. What is a brand but just a word? Nike is just a word, but they've copyrighted it, etc. Now, that word has a neural shortcut for good trainers, good running shoes, or whatever, right? And so words have power. The power has value through contract and rights that a society attributes to those contracts, and the enforceability of those contracts through the law, which is case law written in words, right? And so once you have security that can be publicly owned, identity that is self-sovereign, and enabled using privacy enhanced zero knowledge proofs to attest to anything that is acceptable to the society, you get the creation of a suite of proofs that are easy to store, that are locally, the data remains local, it's not central, and you resolve all of the problems that we have in our current.
Nicholas, I understand that. But anyhow, Ben, over to you.
So I was going to say, I'm not so great answer, Nicholas. I understand and agree with most of what Nicholas has said there. I think it's very important for people to ask that question. There's a great question came up. Are you really going to store all this on the blockchain? And that may be somebody asking because they know that you can't and maintain decentralization. The meta point is Nicholas is answering from his normal spiel of his product, which, by the way, might be world changing. I don't know. I don't have a judgment on it. It might well be. But I think the meta point is that Karim was basically asking perhaps for an independent view of somebody else who understands something about blockchain. So you answering Nicholas in the meta perhaps wasn't helpful to Karim trying to solicit that third party opinion. I think what I'm hearing from Nicholas makes sense. I just about understand enough about computer science and the blockchain to understand the vision of what he's trying to do. But most people don't. So that perhaps transforms what Nicholas is trying to do from a technical achievement into a sales achievement, because for people to believe in these zero knowledge proof attestations, they are going to need to believe, for most people, that is going to collapse down to believing someone that in turn believes it's true. I would love people to get to what I previously pushed for, which is the first principles understanding of cryptography and zero knowledge proofs, that each individual can say, yes, I can see that this is, as you say, Nicholas, self-evidently true. The bridge that I think needs crossing is not technological, but is in bringing it from this very high intellectual level where we sit here in this room as, wealthy people in privileged countries discussing the laws of thermodynamics, down to the man on the street in whatever country just needs to know, how do I trust this shit? And it's probably going to boil down to a social proof for most people. I learned that at some point in the past in a seminar, when a Tony Robbins seminar, the reason I was happy to go walk over hot coals is because of the thermal conductivity and the specific heat capacity of wood. But my mum had a very different reason. She said, well, there's 20,000 people here and only one ambulance. And they've done it lots of times before. There's no way everybody's feet are going to get burnt. Doesn't care about the physics of it. She just needed a sociological proof. People have different proof mechanisms for themselves. And the question I have with what Nicholas is doing, and I think it does sound very interesting and technically also relate to it enough that they entrust it. I don't believe the self-evident bit, I guess, is my challenge. But anyway, that would be
And you and understand. And that's the difference. I mean, I think that some people will be more apt to do something if they understand it. The problem is people doing it because they believe it. I mean, belief is just a form of faith, and it's not based on any facts or any conviction.
Well, it's
exactly
got some
people.
If I can
strong.
respond to two points. One, Ben, you're right, and apologies, Karan, because I didn't realize that you wanted Ben's opinion. But fair enough.
No, 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 no.
Second,
That was great that you came in before Ben actually spoke. So thank you for that. Sorry, continue.
so thank you for that. So to Ben's point, I do recognize that it needs social proof and a little bit of a tidbit of information. We did just get some social proof from Fidelity Center for Applied Technology, who gave us the Inspiration Award from their survey of every company and startup in all of Europe. And we were shortlisted as the only public protocol that was amongst that group by Dogpatch Labs and Blockchain Ireland and Fidelity Center for Applied Technology. So that social proof is coming by people that Bitcoiners even believe in. And the other thing I wanted to say is that it's not my thing. I'm just a contributor and I'm just a community member, and everybody can be part of it, just like everyone was part of Bitcoin. And it's always hard to see things early, as it was hard to see Bitcoin early. And you have to understand this. To the point of adoption and social proof, is if something is self-evidently in your financial interest, people will act. And we see that now in the community where we have people running Android mobile phones, making money in the emerging market world and the emerging world. And money for computing power, at an Android or Rock Pi level is the breakthrough that people have been looking for. It's just we are yet to be seen because we don't have a marketing budget, because we are a community project. And so the dichotomy is that, and Tyler knows that I talk about this a lot, is that I can't go and we can't raise money from VCs, and we couldn't do an ICO. So we can't get the attention that those who sold out can get. And so that is one of the paradoxes that that Pat was saying, that we have to deal with. But eventually people will see us, and the recent, social proof that we got from Fidelity Center for Applied Technology is something that makes me feel that we will get there. And
yeah, we just need
those
more
who join
technologists,
us,
don't we? Just actual
well,
technologists, because
we
we've
need
proven that these
developers.
things can work. Developers. Yeah, the torrent system changed music. Bitcoin is changing finance and so forth. It's all possible to make these movements occur. We just do need people who get it. And there is a real irony here, is that ultimately you're going to need social proof to get a zero knowledge proof system off the ground. It's just,
Nicholas,
yeah.
just a quick one, just for the layman perspective, okay? So just for everybody else to actually understand that. XYZ person, let's say it's just me. I'm going onto the actual decentralized marketplace where I can actually go and buy iPhone or whatnot, like, accessory of that. It gets shipped to me, and nobody knows that it's me who actually ordered that, and it came to my home address, and nobody has any idea about like how much I have actually paid for it. Would that be a possibility?
I don't really think about it in terms of physical purchases in that way. I think the real question is, do you have a right to own an iPhone and use an identity that is private yet provable? So you don't have to give away all of the information, that you really do own that phone. At the moment, you rent that phone, really, like we were talking about renting a Tesla, because you don't have the right to put anything on that phone. Only what Apple allows you to put on that phone goes on that phone, right? That they control the app environment, etc.
Sorry,
So,
iPhone wasn't the right, I shouldn't have used that. Let's say I'm buying 10 bricks. There's no, follow up on that. It's just like a simple, somebody owns it or made it or manufactured it, and I've just now bought it. So
right.
in that
So
scenario.
again, the question for that falls into the financial realm, and that is, what level of oversight does a government require or need of the spending of their citizens? And in the recent infrastructure bill, the government of the U.S. wanted to suggest that $600 was the limit where surveillance begins, and that everyone would have to report every transaction over $600. Now, those are real questions. Those are democracy questions, to my mind, is if you make that money legally and you are spending it legally, what reporting requirements should you be required to provide? And that is a question that we need to come to consensus about as people. And the other point is that you could, in fact, give them AML, KYC on that acquisition of bricks, and I would happily do that as long as it was private. So it says, I will give you the fact that I'm a taxpayer, or I will give you a proven identity that I'm a human. But do you need to have total surveillance over me in order for me to do that? I don't think that's right, because it means that if you don't have privacy, you don't have truth. Because as we've seen in China, or as we've seen in Russia, if you control all the media and you control all the information, you control all of the systems, then people can no longer express themselves. And so you get no diversity of opinion, and you get totalitarian dictatorships.
Can I give people listening a quick bit of homework so that next time they listen to this conversation, they will be enriched significantly? The real pivotal point here of everything Nicholas is saying is about zero knowledge proofs. And it's very easy to hear that and then categorize it. So I don't know what that means, so therefore, whatever. I think it's worth just putting zero knowledge proofs in YouTube and watching a video, something like a video of putting people putting coloured balls behind their back or something like that. It's very, very simple to understand the concept, and it is a real aha moment when you do. When you realize that you can communicate information without giving a, well, you can, for example, prove something without giving away any information about it. So what Nicholas is saying is that there is a mathematical way of proving to the government that have spent X amount of money or paid X amount of tax, or have not exceeded some threshold. Would be a classic and very simple example. I can prove to you, Mr. Government, that I have not exceeded some threshold of income, but I'm not going to tell you what my income is. And there is a mechanism now for doing that using computers and zero knowledge proofs. Worth just popping zero knowledge proofing YouTube. Find one of the videos. That's what I'd suggest.
I'd
If
just
I
like
may,
to add to that, please. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt whoever that was.
no, no, go ahead.
Just to add to what both Ben and Nicholas have been saying, and Coram just then talking about the ordinary person, the person who has maybe lots of different aspects to themselves other than technological, financial, or anything like that. You've got your personal reflection capacity and your theological, spiritual aspect. You're essentially the core of what makes you human. So all of those coming together and trying to make sense of where we are, where we're going in the future, and perhaps how we're evolving. And I think Nicholas's description sounds very, very credible. And maybe that is generally how we're going. How we get there is another thing, of course, making everyone on this planet understand and appreciate that. But on the other spectrum, from Nicholas's end to the other extreme, dare I say, is theological and spiritual developments. And they certainly have been coming on a pace too with technology and understanding what it is that makes us human and why we are. And though some people might say it's not scientific, and it isn't scientific in the way you go to a laboratory and do tests and things like that, but it's interesting how on that idea of evolution and where we're going and how we're going to make ourselves better or make it all better for all of us is it's going very similarly down those lines that you're talking about, Nicholas. And it's through reflection and discernment that we actually can understand those things and wrap them up, tie them up in our own individual beings as humans. So I suggest that part of the homework might be to just look up about Christogenesis, because it's talking about religion and faith and God and, in the beginning was the word and all that sort of thing. But how does it relate to where we're going and what we're evolving to? And perhaps the whole spiritual path, theologically speaking, has been about evolution anyway. It used to be in my bio. It's not there anymore for some crazy reason, but you might want to just look up evolution, spirituality, and so on, and you'll get to those pages. Thank you.
I think that we have to look at religion as social consensus and early sense making that came through religion was the beginnings of sociopolitics, of course. And as we evolve, I think we can include an idea of spirituality or an idea of consciousness that is outside of our, time space continuum. And I think that what will happen, and this is my PTR, is consilience is the thing that we should be aiming for. If you're religious, you would call that, a unity, and that unity is the unity of knowledge, and it's the information field which informs us all, and it's social consensus that enables us to move our societies, and it's about having good inputs into that field. And once we have good, they say garbage in, garbage out. Once you have good inputs in, you'll get good outputs out. And that's the nub of the problem. So Pat, you've hit the nail on the head, is that if we can verify and then trust, we can collaborate and cooperate at an altogether messianic, shall we say, scale. It's you enable a great efficiency in humanity if you don't have to try and guess as to whether you should trust someone. And if you can verify information without needing to run a surveillance state. That is the opportunity that is in front of us, and it is delivered through mathematics and physics. That's
So
how it's happening.
it's based on probabilities. Then that's where you're not having to guess because
Well,
you
when you
have.
have proofs around you. So if you had an attestation framework of everything that you do, because your phone is doing that. Every time you go on a website, it's exchanging a proof. Now, and you see it if you go to your back. If you want to just see it yourself, go to your battery settings on your phone, and you'll see where you spend your time. And so you know that you're getting we live in mirror consciousness. So you know that the black mirror is, every time it sends a call to a website, it's getting a response back. And that information can be valuable, and is valuable to Google, and is valuable to the surveillance capitalists that are running our world. The issue is that they are deciding about how to influence consensus, social consensus, and we need to resolve that. And we can resolve that very clearly by combining security, which is the blockchain, which is public infrastructure, plus identity, which needs to be self-sovereign, and you need to be able to issue, revoke, and recover it autonomously. And then you add to it peer-to-peer exchange with friendly names, and then you make it fully fractal so that anybody can create these amazing new tools. That is the evolution of the technology that's going to change our world. And, that's the future.
The short answer to his question is, though, maybe yes, it does. These things do. Zero knowledge proofs specifically do rely on probability, but don't let things that rely on probability. Don't be worried by that. The whole security of cryptography relies on probability. But the great thing about probabilities is the probability spaces are so huge as to call something that is small chance, when it's 1 in 10 to the 77. And that's such a small chance that it is zero to all intents and purposes. So don't be put off by, oh, well, there's a small chance type of thing, because yes, zero knowledge proofs work through probability, but the mathematicians have got it covered. You're fine. You can sleep at night.
Yeah, and even if it was crackable within 3 hours, you can scale it such that the problem is solvable by a fast computer in longer than 3 hours. So that's what they mean by like the term proof in computer science talks about like a confirmation of the left hand side with the right hand side. So the whole idea of probability has many interpretations here as well. So just want to caution any sort of generalization.
Okay, we got to roll on here. I just saw a video of Vladimir Putin where Lukashenko and him are in the same small room together, about to shake hands, and Putin's hand is visibly shaking in like a Parkinson's style movement, and his leg both on the right side. His right hand and his right leg are both kind of twitching, even shaking right before he shakes hands with Lukashenko. And then, of course, there's a very, very wide viral photo today, or video, of Putin in a meeting with somebody for several minutes, and he's using both hands to hold both corners of the desk rather firmly, which now makes a lot more sense. Which, if he knew that if he's not holding the corners of the desk that he's sitting at with both hands firmly, that his hands might shake. Very interesting conspiracy theory
Wow,
building there. Yeah.
That's
So,
unfortunate.
that's revelation. That's no one's picked it up on the news.
no,
That
not
is
yet.
really cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
Well,
no, that
there's
makes
been
a
some
lot of sense.
speculation was that it was the KGB walk and the way he held his hand, perhaps was, this sort of pattern that he picked up from his time in the service. But this is a lot more similar to what people were saying. So early onset neurodegenerative disease often looks like this. So
Right.
I did
So,
I did think the speed with which his foot was moving was slower than a typical Parkinson's tremor, though. It could also be interpreted as just impatience with the whole way the campaign's going, but definitely worth watching carefully.
okay. So,
Tyler,
I
I
got,
just wanted to let you know. Apparently, Hong Kong from May, people can go there
oh, that's
if
very
they
good.
want. Yeah,
From May,
But there's
what?
still a mandatory quarantine. Sorry.
May 6th, I think, something like that. Someone WhatsApped me the information. I'll try to tweet it out.
Okay. So I've got about 25 good tweets to go through real quickly. Katarina sent in one that Amazon is targeting Shopify with a new buy with Prime service, which allows, Amazon says it will allow their merchants to sell products that they list on Amazon directly from their own websites as part of a move to compete with Shopify. They're enabling the back end, and you can sell it on your own website now. You don't have to sell it on Amazon's website, which is kind of the Shopify model. And Tom found an interesting one that says there's a new critical chipset bug which opens millions of Android devices to remote spying. Researchers have found 3 vulnerabilities in the audio decoders of Qualcomm and MediaTek mobile chips. So more chip vulnerabilities. And Thomas Tong found one that Biden, and this is via Reuters, Biden to ban Russian-affiliated ships from U.S. ports.
Oh, and
Further,
that one's a little bit bigger than some of the other items because that's actually like how the physical petroleum moves. That's how the physical cargo. A lot of the stuff that they have for uh, uh, for doing bans on trade and such and sanctions and other parts, there was a huge number of loopholes, especially in the European variations, where it's like, oh yeah, here's the Italian goods, they just go over here, and we'll do the oil goes over here, and the other parts. When you actually physically stop the cargo from going, that's a very formal kind of thing. And if we're doing it USA, they'll probably lean on other partners to do something similar on that side. So that's the physical isolation, not just the legal side.
so the New York Times, Jeff G found one from the New York Times that a YouTuber purposely crashed his plane in California, according to the FAA. The whole video from December shows Trevor Jacob cruising or cursing in panic before leaping with a parachute out of a small plane. Some experts had wondered if the crash was staged or made for YouTube.
If there's a market for this, maybe we should just have a dedicated crash zone where you can just take airplanes and then say, all right, we're going to jump out here, and then, whoa, look at the fireballing.
Welcome to Jackass. The next one is from MI Tech Review. Crypto millionaires are pouring money into Central America to build their own cities. A new class of crypto investors have bold plans to rebuild societies from scratch, but their pet projects risk repeating the region's long history of corporate colonialism.
For anyone interested in this, look at the history of freebooters. It's one of the foundations of American foreign policy in Central America, and almost no one knows the history of it. It's fascinating. Freebooters, they're crazy.
Yeah, and no doubt they're trying to acquire places that have energy sources like volcanoes and and whatnot.
Access
Uh,
to sunlight's crazy.
yeah. The next is it says Live Bash. A company called Live Bash raises $21 million, plans to revolutionize the performance industry with blockchain tech. The entertainment tech startup will allow performers to rent one of its physical stages to live stream and mint their own performances. So now they can stream and then mint the streaming of their performances
The
simultaneously.
operative word being rent there again.
Yes. The next is that Spotify opens up video podcasting to everyone. I should say everyone in the U.S. and other select markets.
Internet service providers weep.
Yeah. So now they're officially jumping into the YouTube. Yeah, and this is another sign that the subscriptions are slowing down, right? Just like Netflix is going into games, and now Spotify is going into video.
$200 million for Joe Rogan. How many times can you do that? Repeat it, that same play.
Google rolls out their new cookie alternative in Europe. Search Giant says it responds to pressure from watchdogs. Users will be able to reject cookies with a single click. Google doesn't care because they're going to be able to track you, but no one else will. But
Just as a fun thing, just as a little personal anecdote. So I use an iPad. I've got Safari on this thing, and what I've done is actually disabled all cookies from loading at all. It's actually entertaining to see which websites break and which ones don't. Oddly enough, what I found across the internet is the thing that it breaks the most is news websites, specifically the ones that say, "Hey, can we put a tracking cookie on your thing?" GDPR style. What's hilarious is that if you click the reject button, it's not, it can't put the cookie on your computer to say that you reject cookies. Across most of the internet, Reddit will only load the first page of results and it won't scroll anymore, which is great for breaking habits of, constantly going to Reddit. But the actual things that happen when you actually funk with that infrastructure, which websites break and which ones don't, tells a lot about whose technical decisions are actually being trusted. And I find that a lot of the cookie tracking infrastructure stuff is in practice, when you actually look at how it's architected, is very much in bad faith. So when Google's saying we've got an alternative version, it's like, well, it's not going to perform exactly what they're saying it's going to do.
A startup called Zubale gets a whole bunch of funding to match gig workers with e-commerce fulfillment jobs. And BB found one somewhat proving a very high correlation between Tesla sales going up the day after the Super Bowl, which had a bunch of their rivals advertising. Tesla notably doesn't spend any money on advertising, but many of their rivals did during the Super Bowl, and Tesla sales had an all-time high the day after the Super Bowl. So Tesla received unprecedented ad revenue from the Super Bowl, even though they didn't pay for any of it because of their rivals.
But they had like Arnold Schwarzenegger talking about Greek gods love electricity, they love electric cars, it's manly to drive an electric vehicle.
Well, they just hit $1 trillion value, and notably zero spent on marketing. Quite a feat. Apple, BB found another one that Apple is ordered to pay a man more than $1,000 for not including a power adapter in his new iPhone. The judge ruled
How
that
many people have been forced to suffer the same fate that might be up for certain amounts of class action? That could be very exciting for some
the,
lawyers licking their lips.
yeah, the
Yeah, but
judge.
it's in Brazil, so hope the U.S. government can look at that. It's in Brazil.
The next is also from BB that Elon Musk's Boring Company raises $675 million to build transportation tunnels. The company is now valued at $5.7 billion, is working on an underground loop in Las Vegas. Sequoia Capital participating in the round. And what
Can
else?
anyone explain that to me?
Yes, very briefly, tunnels are expensive, and they say, "Look, we're going to do a tunnel." Okay, well, you're going to need a lot of capital for that. People that are used to investing in software companies get surprised when there's like, "Wait, people spend lots more money on physical infrastructure? Yeah, it costs a lot. Wait, what if we did multiple infrastructure projects?" It's like, well, it's not how the politics typically work, but sure, we can do that too. Okay, valuations through the roof. It's more that kind of thing going on. Tesla has a specific version of instead of having like a typical tunnel boring machine, they have a smaller version, and it's electric powered. They call it like Proof Rock, I think is the most recent version they have. It's, I mean, it's interesting. It's a thing. One of Elon Musk, what he actually does is he rebrands like unsexy government infrastructure and makes it look like exciting and something to talk about. But I mean, none of this is new. We've had most of this stuff for a very long time. It just didn't receive more political support and public support. And so being able to do that in the private sector and say, hey, look, it's sexy, it's new, it has the color red on it, all of a sudden people get very excited about civil infrastructure, which is something we haven't had for a long while. So,
Fritz,
part of it.
you would likely know, if anybody. I heard that Elon was very much focused on some kind of tweaks that would allow for an order of magnitude cost savings in cost per meter of boring, underground boring, where the standard, I believe it was Sweden's company Skanska, had the cheapest price per meter prior to,
Sure.
and then Elon calculated that if he could save, one some percentage on the front of the boring machine, and then another percentage, which is when you have multiple percentages multiplying against each other in different parts of the machinery, then you could then get to an order of magnitude level of cost savings, which would give you this asymmetrical advantage,
You
which
get
would
larger market, yeah. No,
yeah,
no, it is,
which
the
would
logic is sound on that.
it would unlock other use cases,
Mm-hmm.
and ostensibly that's why somebody like Sequoia would invest, because that's what Sequoia likes to invest in, which is somebody who has some technology, some asymmetrical advantage, like a defensible moat that
I would advise that they should take a look at a deal that I did back in the 90s called Eurotunnel, which was 18 miles under the channel, and the disaster that was financially. I think it will be, very salutary lesson for them.
So with Boring Company, one of the things I mean, they did a number of things that are smart about it. What they did is they reduced the diameter of the tunnel, because do you really need it to be that wide? When you reduce the diameter, you get an exponential. It's like basic geometry. We make the circle smaller. You have exponentially less dirt you need to extract. So that's one advantage you get. Another thing is making the upgrade to electric. Frankly put, just batteries and motors used to be more expensive than a gasoline engine, and you didn't quite get the same amount of punch or amount of power through for the amount of weight and power they're putting into it. But hey, you're coming from an environment where, hey, we got pretty good at making our own motors, we got pretty good at the battery electrical systems, and we can make them cheaper. So you got about 30% of the cost just on that one. Then you combine it with the smaller tunnel diameter. It's like, yeah, you go 3x, 10x, yeah, you can do that. But the real question is whether or not you can get civic governance to greenlight it. And so this is where it's interesting. What they're actually doing with the initial projects is they're looking at the biggest part with the most people don't realize what civil infrastructure actually is. It's not to build infrastructure that helps people. It's normally as a tax thing that the government says that they're doing something, and then it's handed out to as political patronage to generate maximum number of jobs for people that are politically connected or families or some such. And then if it actually ends up being useful afterwards, that's a side effect. So when you actually say, hey, we're actually going to build a thing and we're going to build it for the lowest cost possible, that's actually politically unattractive for a lot of large scale whole infrastructure projects, and they'll stall out until the bill goes up high. So what they did is they shrunk it and actually doing it less as a civil engineering project, and they're shrinking them to a repeatable product, very Silicon Valley of them. One of the things that they're selling is the idea that you can have this machine. It's small enough, so small in fact, that you can put the entire thing on the back of a giant semi truck, and you drive it to the site, and then you put it in the ground. And the idea is that it does a drill of this, a short distance, something about like 100 meters or so, or 300 feet for people in America, and it just goes underneath like a single railway, like a little pedestrian pathway. Nothing too crazy. Do you really need a tunnel for that? Not really. An overpass would probably be cheaper. But the key part is there are enough places that are interested in that they will pay for that. And if it can do that entire drill operation just 7-10 days, front to back, do it for 50, 100 grand or so, and do that repeatedly and get really, really good at that. And what's interesting is it lowers the cost of production for all of the manufacturing that goes into the Boring Company, all of the concrete, the custom forms and slip forms they need to do and assemble on site, all of the transportation infrastructure, all of the engineers you need to train, all the electrical motor upgrades, etc. So they're able to constantly reinvest that into the R&D, so they can do longer tunnels, larger diameters, and get more competitive, more aggressive projects with that. And so I think their strategy is sound. The reason why I sound slightly hesitant is that there are bottlenecks like Nicholas is referring to that are kind of being a little bit hand wavium here. And it's not that no one else could do these things. It's just that the things that they're giving up aren't what people think they're giving up. It's not because we had a massive technological breakthrough. Oh my God, how are they going to do this off? It's literally just making it smaller, making it electric. But the thing that's actually a little more interesting, and this is something that's across most of Musk's companies have the same property, is the stuff that's most interesting is how he's doing it with both government procurement and how he's rebranding something that other people wouldn't normally get excited about. And that's where it's really, really interesting, because this is getting people excited about tunnels, where historically has been something where it's just saying, oh, it's the more expensive bridge. This is where you can start building new kinds of civil infrastructure and getting people excited about actually building stuff again, rather than saying, not my backyard, which is the historical way that things are done. So yeah, that's I see a little more positive long term trend there.
okay.
But may I ask, Chris, but right now they are using cars instead of originally high speed train, where like substitute car with the trains in the end.
Very briefly, using it for like Teslas and tunnels is a very self-serving kind of way of doing this. Um, uh, it kind of ties into the Hyperloop stuff, which I kind of consider to be kind of in bad faith. And there's a lot of, by the way, Tyler, I don't know if you've covered this or whatever, but Hyperloop recently laid off like half their staff. This is like a month ago or so. They're only doing cargo now, and all their contracts dried up. They've got like a single thing they're doing over in Saudi Arabia.
That's why I
But
can't
it
understand that Sequoia are going for the isn't the Boring Company just Hyperloop too? I mean, it's just doesn't
no,
make
no, no.
any
This is
sense.
separate. So Hyperloop is some open source ish type kind of brand that Branson got involved with. Musk goes, I don't have time for this, but hey, let's put a lot of engineering time into this because please, I don't want public infrastructure to compete with my private car company. Boring Company is a separate endeavor. There's a lot of crossover of what they could be doing, but the Boring Company is a specific. It's a tunnel boring machine. And they're selling it as a service that they say will bring this machine on site and will bore a tunnel for you, but it's actually the physical machines where most of their assets are for that, rather
Yeah,
than the Hyperloop, which is like an
Hyperloop can
IP
be,
portfolio.
yeah, it can be above ground even. Hyperloop.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's more of a. So here's a short version with Hyperloop. Hyperloop again, it's most civil infrastructure projects aren't built to actually like help people or do it provide a service. They're there to provide political patronage, and so things do not get greenlit by commissions until that political patronage is secured. And you have certain amounts of people handing out favors for different things. The reason why it's really important is that the cost for building a Hyperloop has never been about the technology involved. It's always been about land acquisition. When you go underground, you bypass a significant amount of those challenges because they're regulated differently. One more thing is that the Hyperloop, it's kind of a joke in some regards because they're saying, well, look, we've got magnetic levitation. Look, we've got all these other things. The original version Musk had actually resembled something that was vaguely cost efficient, and then every subsequent design that they upgraded it for continue to add cost per kilometer to the point where it's so absurd that there's no market that can support it. And so over the long term, if we want to be moving fast in tubes and such, you need a completely different architecture. Boring Company says, let's go slow, let's go underground, and let's do something that feeds into another economic base like a Tesla car or something else that already has that economic foundation, and it spreads the risk across multiple companies. So it's smart. I mean, it'll probably work. It's just not as revolutionary as people are calling it. However, if people can believe in it, they'll build it. So that's the important
But
part.
but come on, now let's be realistic. If you're a government and you're talking about boring a hole under people's under people's property or everything else, it's not going to happen anytime soon. I just don't understand how they think that this is going to be a profitable business. I just
It,
don't understand.
in
By
the
the
United
way,
States, you do short hops,
who
and it's regulated by typically that the property rights don't extend. It used to be like from the sky above to the hell down below is the old legal doctrine for that. There's some fun Latin phrase to that. When the FAA moved in, they regulated everything from the airspace above, so you only own the area above your property like a few hundred feet up or something like that, depending on your area. But then the another thing that's important, especially for American law, is the mining rights and mineral rights reduce those even further to you only own the ground like going down a small distance below your land. Everything with mineral rights, utility rights, etc., are
Right, but it's a
reserved by the
political
city or
thing.
the
Like the
state.
point I'm trying to make is that it's a political thing, and most people are going to be extremely NIMBY about this. And building metros is already an expensive endeavor. So I just think it's just amazing how he, to a previous point, is able to brand things or rebrand things to make them sexy. And smart people seem to be putting in money at multi-billion-dollar valuations. That's why I'm trying to understand, like, how is it possible that they believe that this is going to work?
It's
just
probably
for
really
just
the
for a
right.
moment, like let's put the cost issue aside for a moment. How many of us actually had the experience of going through the Channel Tunnel, loading up your car in the actual train itself? I'm not talking about the actual sitting in a train and going over the Channel Tunnel. I'm talking about like actually driving your car into the train and then train taking you from point A to B. How many of us have actually
I've
done
do,
that?
I've done that, and we financed the Eurotunnel, which is why I know it was a terrible investment.
Any more of the guys here on the stage?
Yeah, I've been on the Eurotunnel several times. Why? What's the second question?
So the point I'm trying to say here, like, the whole experience of actually driving into the actual train, it was done because it was like there was no technology like at that point in time that when you were simply actually loading up your car into the actual, the train itself. Now with the electric and autonomous cars, I mean, effectively you're talking about actually self-driven through the whole tunnel. So in terms of the actually, the operational side of the tunnel is not going to be that much expensive, and the whole experience is not going to be actually, any other tunnel. It's going to be actually self-driven pretty much. So from that point of view, by the time the tunnel gets completed, I think it's going to be a lot more financially viable as compared to if we bring in other tunnels into the whole equation. That was my point.
One
How
more
many
thing to throw on there.
underpasses do you use anyway?
Honda, I just want to say something very briefly. The so when you brought up electrification, one of the reasons that does result in cost reduction, it's non-linear cost reductions. It's not because of the immediate effect; it's the secondary components. So, as an example, when you have gas-powered vehicles go through a tunnel, well, the gas-powered vehicle needs air to combust the engine, and then it exhausts, a lot of tailpipe exhaust fumes and CO2 and stuff. You have to continuously pump that as air circulation through the entire tunnel is so that people don't suffocate and cars don't go boom, etc. And that's an enormous safety hazard. So what they do is they have these massive ventilation systems in order to provide continuous airflow through tunnels. If the electrical foundations are providing those ever goes down, you have people literally suffocating and very very bad things if they ever get stuck in that tunnel. So what happens is they build up lots of safety backup mechanisms and backup generators, etc. And so this is an enormous cost increase. But the thing is that when you put it on that infrastructure, you then did say, well, we need to also protect it against things going wrong. Like, what happens if a car explodes in that tunnel? How much could it chain react with all the other cars? And what would that do to the ventilation systems and other parts? And so all these secondary effects end up stacking pretty substantially. When you compare it to an electric vehicle, it just goes, well, we don't need the ventilation because it's not constantly putting fumes out. We just need basic airflow. There's nothing too crazy about that. You can miniaturize all those other systems and the support components, some of them you can just eliminate entirely and still maintain a high degree of safety. So on paper, this stuff should be a lot cheaper. We're talking like maybe an order of magnitude or more. Whether or not it actually ends up building out, or we end up finding out that there's like oopsies, it turns out the electric vehicles, like say the lithium fires, are actually orders of magnitude worse, and you need a suppression system. I'm just making up a scenario. Anything like that could add that cost back in. But for right now, with venture capitalists saying it's the future, you can make an argument that decreasing the cost by 10x would increase the market size by 10x, and that look at how much billions of dollars are spent on tunnels worldwide. If we can get just a small percentage of that market, look what we can do. So on paper, there is a case to be made for it. It's just, maybe it's not like the holy crap, this changes everything that you see in the PR media. But there is some foundational stuff here that's interesting.
Name me the
Chris,
last
Chris,
tunnel that you've seen built anywhere of any length. I can't think of any.
Yeah, so these are short
Chris,
hops.
I was going to ask you, what about the Virgin tube thing, vacuum tube thing? Wouldn't it be better to forget about when you get from London to Paris? You can just rent a car, electric car on that side and electric car this side. Why do you need even to put your car on the? I think we will go away. I agree with Tyler a long time ago. He said, soon we won't need a car. We'll just rent a car. I mean,
Sure, I'm more just referring to the electrical system. You can run as a car, you can use a train, you could use private, you could use public. I was just referring just to the tech stack for the tunnel itself.
I think the boring companies just practice for Mars, and he's going to get there either through memes or military contracts. But that's definitely a piece of technology that's underserved, has many large military contracts. So the boring company, I think, is going to do just fine.
Yeah,
I,
the other part you can put the size and diameter of it is just the size you can actually put on a star hopper. So it's actually under the tonnage limit. It's under the diameter. So yeah, it's actually something you can literally just pick that thing up and put it on on one of their spaceships and take it to other planets, which will be very convenient because anything you can do in situ on other planets, just like carving things out, that is going to save you fortunes on the mass you have to bring there. So yeah, there's it's a complementary technology. It's not something I would say as like changes everything on its own. But when you combine it with all the other ones like the battery manufacturing, the recycling components, the fact that you've got launch company going on, you've got maybe some solar things that you can do for the equipment itself and
Forgive
recharge
the
the site.
question.
It
Why
gets
do you need to
interesting.
dig holes in Mars? Just why
Radiation.
holes?
Radiation. So two things: temperature and radiation. So you don't want to be exposed to the thin atmosphere, the lack of shielding in one scenario. But two, building structures underground, it's also easier to secure them against any other kind of catastrophic event. So that's the idea, I think, in general, that underground habitation is going to be
So we're
the
going to
way
live
forward.
underground on Mars. This sounds like a tremendous, if only we could just solve the climate problem here, we wouldn't need to go to Mars and
Well,
live
it
underground, would
I
we?
like
it's
the idea of having a backup, though. Having a
it's
backup is a
it's
good idea, right?
it's good to have the general technology around. One other thing to say is that there's about 100. The price is about 100. I think I checked the numbers, but it's like a what, like $100,000 a kilogram or a ton or something like that. I need to look it back up with things. It's dropping in price like every couple of years. I don't want the most recent numbers are, but the thing is, building it on Mars, where you can bring the construction equipment with you, it reduces that to you're paying, not pennies, but you're paying essentially just the price of sunlight that you can capture, which is a very, very different amount than if you're bringing all your mass with you. So whenever you're trying to look at other planetary stuff, the more that you can bring that you can do its own in situ construction, the better. But yeah, like Nicholas is saying, that it's like, well, shouldn't we be solving problems here on Earth? Yes, sure. However, the motivation of having a lot of people saying, hey, let's go do a thing, that's something that is difficult politically to arrange. And so, if along the way we end up solving a lot of problems here on Earth, then you can get both for the price of one. But that's a more nuanced
Well,
argument.
why
And
isn't he doing
Well, the
something
boring
to save the earth with his
Well,
amazing
he
marketing
is
skills?
Nicholas.
solar panels and electric vehicles.
Yeah, Tesla's going a long way towards that, and a lot of the research you do for space will inform and create technologies for combating climate change. So, if he was only focused on Mars, I would totally agree with you. It's clearly easier to solve the problem here than it is to move us all to Mars, and it is a depressing outlook to sit on Mars with Earth just a blue dot in the sky. And you can't communicate with Earth in less than, you're going to wait minimum of 20, often up to 40 minutes for a reply to your text message. You can never have a video call. It's going to be a very lonely place. But if you look at Earth as an ecosystem, an independent ecosystem, a lot of what you have to do and a lot of the stuff you have to think about to solve the problems on Earth um, will come from the sort of experiments and thinking you have to do on Mars. So I think that doing it as well as creating the world's largest energy company and so forth is kind of, I don't want to say fine because that makes it sound very much like a moral judgment, but you get the idea.
We've got a
It's a
lot of people.
government subsidized research program, I think, but also the idea, if anyone hasn't seen this, Elon makes, I think, bricks with the ground that he removes from the boring
Yeah, sure.
tunnels. And those bricks are actually much better than the competition, like at Home Depot or whatever, and they're cheaper. So he found a way not only to perhaps dig for less a lower expense, but also to extract some sort of value out of that dirt or whatever. And of course, that varies by region. But the kind of clever people that Elon employs span 3, 4, 5 companies. So an expert in material science often makes some sort of visit or transitions from Tesla to SpaceX or vice versa. So that kind of fluidity within the structure of those companies also is what gives some of these crazy ideas a little bit more potential credibility.
As a brief example of this, I get a little annoyed at the brick one specifically because I literally spent like a year of my life in a techno hippie commune doing brick press machines and like tractors and off grid stuff is nuts. But the thing is, everyone's going is like, Chris, why are you spending all your time out there with things? It's like, what possibly will that do, kind of thing. And so it's like there's a certain amount of like, okay, that's funny. Like, come back to civilization, let's do stuff. And then and everyone just kind of gets a little stink eye type kind of thing to it. Flash forward 10 years, and Elon Musk says, we're doing a brick press machine for the Boring Company. Everyone's like, wow, this is the best thing ever. Wow, that's so sexy. It's so cool. And all of a sudden, everyone's all excited about bricks machines. And I'm just going, what the fuck? But that's a big thing what Elon Musk does. Is he takes existing ideas, brands them, makes them sexy and cool. I mean, before Elon Musk did electric vehicles, and this is actually, I think, his biggest contribution. It's not actually the tech development. Don't get me wrong, that is a contribution. But the fact that electric vehicles were seen as weak and puny, and this sort of thing that, oh yeah, but yeah, you're not a man if you don't get a car like that. The psychological power of automotive advertising is incredible. The amount of money that you've got $7 trillion oil industry that can literally burn 70 to $100 billion and barely break 1% as a marketing budget. That can buy a lot of very fancy propaganda people, marketing executives, advertising folk, political, think pieces, think tanks, etc., all to give people a psychological concept that electric vehicles are a waste of time. The fact that he was able to counteract that and suddenly make it politically acceptable to the point now where you've got Super Bowl advertisements where every car company is basically going, our supply chain is fucked, we might as well just make this transition now. And then following that kind of concept where he doesn't even have to show up at the place because the brand is that strong, that sort of branding doesn't come about in many times in like even history. And I think that's actually the strongest thing of what he actually does. the other thing is that when he hires some very smart engineer people, he stays out of the way enough to actually let them get to do their work. She'll take credit for their work later. But the fact is, he actually knows when to step aside and let internal things do their own way. Very, very few executives or CEOs these days know when to do that. They're taught in this MBA management version of micromanage things and then set it on fire and then till you're going parachute out the back door. Elon Musk is a long-term, buy and hold type kind of guy. And I think over the long term, that's going to actually present a very good pattern for other people to follow. But where there's only so many rooms in the world for people like him, so that's I don't think it's like the best society template for things. But I think people going that direction of saying let's do stuff on space, let's do things on Earth, let's do exciting, let's do long term investments. That's actually maybe branding that I think is a very positive thing. So yeah,
And
good job.
Chris, look at what's happening in this room. For the first time ever, we're actually having an interesting, boring discussion.
Hey, I'm all for it.
Claps for that.
Absolutely, it's fascinating.
Okay.
So that
Yeah, Ben.
Tyler, don't worry. You sound tired from all your traveling, and you don't need to subject you to my voice
Okay.
any longer. So let's go. Let's move on.
Okay. So China's vice foreign minister says that China will continue to strengthen strategic ties with Russia, showing the relationship remains solid despite growing concerns over the war crimes in Ukraine. China says it will keep boosting strategic ties with Russia. And then BB found one from the BBC.
You should make the ding noise for that one, surely.
Okay.
BBBBC.
Thanks.
That, that actors
That's
launch a campaign against AI show stealers.
Good luck with that.
Equity, the Performing Arts Workers Union, has launched a new campaign called Stop AI Stealing the Show. From automated audiobooks to digital avatars, AI systems are now replacing skilled professional performers. We gotta stop them.
If they
Tyler.
really want to be
Tyler, on
aggressive,
that
they will.
note, Elon Musk linking Elon Musk. Elon Musk recently said that AI is more dangerous, or intelligence AI is more dangerous than nukes.
Gets
Yeah,
a lot of clicks for that.
that was a while ago.
Well,
The
one of the things is that those AI, if those actor unions wanted to really be aggressive, they'd create their own little micro investment fund to fund AI startups that can maintain competitiveness for actors well into the future. Like that'd be the double play on that. If they're going with the
And licensing
anti-tech
digital
version, they're
avatars.
going to get steamrolled.
They should just make a studio that licenses digital twins. That would be pretty
Sure,
cool.
you could make a fortune
Already
with that.
happening. It's already happening. We're working with a group here in Los Angeles where we've seen a whole parade of stars capture their digital twin, and those will be automated and live in perpetuity. The only question is which version of that star, and whether you want the 2022 version or the, you know, 2000 version. So it's a very interesting subject that is almost certainly there's going to be a whole raft of completely non-human stars that look and feel entirely human.
Fat Elvis. The microplastics are found in the blood of farm animals, including cows and pigs, for the first time, raising concerns about their movement through the food chain. Microplastics.
And humans as well.
Yeah. Well,
Here's one for you. 50% of the microplastics come out from car tires, according to a recent study. So just by the fact that they're on the road wearing away constantly, it's a combination of the natural rubber with the synthetic stuff, and yeah, the microfibers just end up going to the drainage ways, and yeah, it turns out that any sample size is coming from that. So you want to talk about a world without wheels? This is where it gets kind of crazy. But it's going to take time for people to study it, figure out what they want to do with it, the technology parts, political parts, etc. But the microplastics thing is everywhere.
last but not least, from the South China Morning Post, I'll pin it so that you can see it. Let me pin it so that you don't think I'm being hyperbolic here. Here we go. There it is. Click, click, click. Bada boom, bada bing. There it is. You can click it. It says, the headline reads, Growing Isolation Puts China and U.S. on the brink of a new Cold War. Obama's ambassador to China Max Baucus says dire relations are getting worse with each side isolating into big separate teams. Technology and culture are key battlegrounds in a troublesome downward trend. He says the two powers are on the brink of a technological and cultural Cold War. Among
He
the
must have been
factors,
listening to tech news around the world.
among the factors fueling the downward spiral were the continuing barrage of U.S. sanctions targeting Beijing, rising nationalism in China, growing domestic pressure in the country as Chinese President Xi Jinping seeks a third term, and a class of Chinese officials who are hypercritical of the U.S., he said. So that does it for today, and right on time, full 3 hours. Thank you to everybody, and have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
weekend, and we'll catch you on Monday.
Tyler,
Thank you,
Thank you
Tyler.
thank
so
you.
much,
Thank you.
Tyler.
Take care. Have a good
Have so
weekend.
much.